When Hannah Mercer signed her divorce papers in a room full of laughter, she thought she'd lost everything. But what her smug billionaire ex-husband Graham Halstead didn't know was that the invisible woman he'd just discarded was about to inherit a fortune and the protection of Manhattan's most dangerous man. This is the story of a woman who turned humiliation into power, financial ruin into empire, and discovered that sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't a gun, it's the truth. If you want to see how the cruelest laughter becomes someone else's downfall, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far Hannah's story reaches. D's. The conference room on the 47th floor of the Halstead Tower smelled like mahogany, expensive cologne, and triumph that wasn't hers. Hannah Mercer sat at the end of the polished table, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. Across from her, Graham Halstead, her husband of 6 years, soon to be her ex, leaned back in his leather chair with the kind of ease that came from never having lost anything that mattered. "Just sign it, Hannah," Graham said, his voice carrying that particular blend of boredom and impatience she'd come to know so well. "We both know how this ends." To his right sat his mother, Constance Halstead, a woman who'd perfected the art of looking down her nose at people even when they were seated at the same level. To his left, his younger sister Sloane scrolled through her phone with theatrical disinterest. And flanking them like well-dressed vultures were Graham's business partners, Marcus Webb and Jonathan Chen. Men who'd watched Hannah serve them coffee at family gatherings and never once bothered to learn her name. Hannah's attorney, a court-appointed lawyer named Dennis Park, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, pushed the divorce settlement across the table toward her. The pages were crisp, professionally bound, stamped with the seal of Whitmore and Associates, the most expensive law firm in Manhattan. "Mrs. Halstead," Dennis said quietly, "you should review." "She doesn't need to review anything," Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp. "The prenup is ironclad. We had it verified by 3 separate firms." Hannah looked down at the settlement. She didn't need to read it again. She'd gone over it a dozen times in the past week, each reading confirming what she already knew. She was leaving this marriage with exactly nothing. No home, no savings, no stake in the Halstead empire that she'd helped Graham build from behind the scenes, managing his calendar, hosting his clients, playing the perfect wife while he climbed. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed 6 years ago, young, in love, and foolish enough to believe that love was a fair exchange for security, stipulated that, in the event of divorce, she would receive no alimony, no property, and no share of any assets acquired during the marriage. She'd spent the last 6 years watching Graham's net worth climb from $8 million to somewhere north of $300 million, and she would walk away with nothing but the clothes in her closet. "Hannah." Graham's voice pulled her attention back to him. He was smiling now, that indulgent smile he used when he wanted to appear generous. "I know this isn't easy, but we both know this marriage was a mistake. You're a sweet girl, but let's be honest, you were never going to fit into this world." Sloane snorted, not bothering to look up from her phone. Constance's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "My son is being extraordinarily gracious," Constance said, her voice clipped and precise. "Most men in his position would have you sign a non-disclosure agreement as well. But Graham has always been soft-hearted when it comes to you." Soft-hearted. The word felt like a slap. Hannah had spent 6 years watching Graham's soft heart calcify into something cold and calculating. Watching the man she'd married transform into someone who measured every relationship by its ROI. "Sign the papers, Hannah," Graham said again, and this time there was an edge beneath the boredom. "We have a board meeting in 20 minutes. Hannah picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. That surprised her. That after everything, after 6 years of making herself smaller and quieter and more palatable, her hand was steady. "You know what I remember?" Hannah said softly, and the room went quiet. Even Sloane looked up from her phone. "I remember the night you proposed. We were in that tiny apartment in Brooklyn, and you told me you were going to build an empire. You said you needed someone who believed in you, someone who would stand beside you when things got hard." Graham's jaw tightened. "Things change." "They do," Hannah agreed. "I remember working 2 jobs so you could focus on your startup. I remember hosting investors in our living room, making them feel important, making them believe in your vision. I remember the night Marcus almost walked away from the funding deal, and I spent 3 hours talking to his wife about her mother's cancer treatment, making her feel seen, making her feel valued. And the next morning, Marcus signed. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Jonathan looked away. I remember all of it, Hannah continued, her voice still quiet, still steady. And I remember the exact moment you stopped seeing me. It was at the Morgan benefit 3 years ago. You introduced me to that tech CEO from San Francisco, and he asked what I did. You laughed and said, "She's my wife. That's what she does." Like I was a job title instead of a person. Hannah, Graham started, but she talked over him. I'm not finished. She met his eyes, and something in her gaze made him stop. I remember becoming invisible. I remember learning to disappear in crowded rooms, to smile through conversations where people looked past me to find someone more important. I remember the affairs. Yes, Graham, I knew about all of them. I knew about the associate from your legal team, the CFO from the Singapore office, the model you met at that charity auction. Constance's expression had turned to stone. Sloane's eyes had gone wide. I remember choosing not to care, Hannah said, because caring would mean admitting that I'd built my entire life around someone who'd stopped loving me the moment I stopped being useful. And I remember telling myself that this was enough, that being Mrs. Graham Halstead was worth the cost of being no one at all. She picked up the pen and signed her name on the first page, then the second, then the third. But here's what you're going to remember, Graham, Hannah said as she signed the final page. You're going to remember that I walked away with my dignity. You're going to remember that I didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't make a scene. You're going to remember that when you finally broke me, I didn't shatter. I just got very, very quiet. She pushed the signed documents back across the table. Dennis looked at her with something like pity. Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. Jonathan was staring at the table. Graham took the papers, glanced at them, and nodded to Dennis. We're done here. We're done, Hannah agreed. She stood, smoothing down the simple black dress she'd worn because it was the only thing in her closet that still felt like hers. I'll be out of the apartment by the end of the week. The penthouse belongs to the company, Constance said sharply. You have 48 hours. Hannah nodded. 48 hours to pack up 6 years of a life that had never really belonged to her. 48 hours to figure out where a woman with no money, no home, and no prospects was supposed to go. She walked to the door, her heels clicking against the marble floor with a sound like a countdown. Hannah. She stopped but didn't turn around. Graham's voice had softened just slightly. For what it's worth, I did love you. Once. Hannah looked back at him, at this man she'd built her entire world around, and felt nothing at all. It was the most terrifying and liberating feeling she'd ever experienced. I know, she said. That's the saddest part. She walked out of the conference room, out of the Halstead Tower, and out of the life she'd spent 6 years building. The elevator ride down 47 floors felt like falling, like the world dropping away beneath her feet. When she stepped out onto Fifth Avenue, the October air hit her like a physical thing, cold and sharp and brutally real. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out, expecting another message from Dennis about paperwork or logistics. Instead, the caller ID read, Lauren Pierce, and Associates. Hannah didn't recognize the name. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press the green button, some instinct that said her life was already demolished. What was one more unknown variable? Mrs. Halstead? The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, female. Mrs. Mercer, Hannah corrected automatically. I'm not Mrs. Halstead anymore. Mrs. Mercer, the woman amended smoothly. My name is Lauren Pierce. I'm an estate attorney. I need to speak with you about a matter concerning your late grandmother, Eleanor Mercer. Hannah's grandmother had died 8 months ago, a quiet death in a quiet nursing home in Connecticut. Hannah had been the only one at the funeral. Graham had been in Dubai, closing a deal he said couldn't wait. I already settled my grandmother's estate, Hannah said, confused. There wasn't much, just some personal effects and a small savings account. There was another account, Lauren said, a trust that your grandmother established 40 years ago and kept entirely separate from her primary estate. The trust was structured with very specific release conditions, which were only recently satisfied. Miss Mercer, I need to meet with you as soon as possible. This is a matter that requires immediate attention. Hannah looked up at the Halstead Tower behind her, at the steel and glass monument to her ex-husband's success. She thought about the apartment she had 48 hours to vacate, about the $847 in her checking account that represented her entire financial reality. What kind of trust? Hannah asked. The kind that's going to change your life, Lauren said. Can you meet me at my office in an hour? I'm at Rockefeller Center, 49th floor. Hannah checked the time. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. She had nowhere to be, no one waiting for her, nothing to do except start dismantling the remnants of a life that had already ended. I'll be there, Hannah said. Lauren Pierce's office was nothing like the cold, masculine spaces Hannah had grown accustomed to in Graham's world. The waiting area was designed in warm grays and soft creams with actual art on the walls, not the corporate abstracts that wealthy men bought for their tax write-offs, but paintings that looked like someone had chosen them because they meant something. The receptionist, a young man with kind eyes and an easy smile, offered her coffee, real coffee, not the bitter sludge from the Halstead Tower break room, and told her Ms. Pierce would be right with her. Hannah sat in one of the plush chairs and tried not to think about the fact that she had no idea where she was going to sleep tomorrow night. Her parents were gone, both lost to a car accident when she was 19. She had no siblings. Her few friends from college had drifted away over the years, casualties of Graham's social calendar and her own disappearing act. Ms. Mercer? Hannah looked up. Lauren Pierce was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp features and sharper eyes that looked like they missed nothing. She wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Hannah's entire wardrobe and carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from winning. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Lauren said, extending her hand. Hannah shook it, noting the firm grip. Please come into my office. The office was spacious but not ostentatious, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Rockefeller Center. Lauren gestured to a chair across from her desk and sat down, pulling out a leather folder. I'm going to be direct with you, Ms. Mercer, because this situation requires clarity, Lauren said. Your grandmother, Eleanor Mercer, established a trust in 1984, shortly after your mother was born. The trust was funded with assets from her late husband's estate, your grandfather, Thomas Mercer. Hannah nodded. She'd never known her grandfather. He'd died before she was born. Your grandfather was a very successful real estate developer in Manhattan during the 1970s and early 1980s, Lauren continued. When he passed away in 1983, your grandmother inherited a substantial portfolio. However, she had concerns about her daughter, your mother, and the choices she was making. Your mother was involved with a man your grandmother believed was unsuitable. Hannah felt a pang. Her mother had married Hannah's father despite Eleanor's objections, and the rift had never fully healed. Eleanor established this trust with very specific conditions, Lauren said. The assets would remain untouched until her death. Upon her death, the trust would be transferred to her granddaughter, you, but only after a waiting period of 6 months, and only if you had demonstrated independence from family wealth or support. Hannah's heart was starting to beat faster. What does that mean? It means your grandmother wanted to ensure you could stand on your own before you inherited anything from her, Lauren said gently. She didn't want you to become dependent on money as a substitute for self-worth. The trust documents specify that you must be financially independent, either through employment, education, or separation from familial support, for at least 6 months after her death. I've been independent for years, Hannah said. I've been married, living my own life. Marriage to a wealthy spouse is specifically excluded, Lauren interrupted. The trust language is very clear on that point. Your grandmother believed that economic dependence in marriage was still dependence. Hannah felt something cold settle in her chest. Her grandmother had been right. However, Lauren continued, as of today you meet all the conditions. You are divorced, you are receiving no support from your former spouse, and 6 months have passed since your grandmother's death. She opened the folder and pulled out a document. Ms. Mercer, the trust currently holds assets worth approximately $4.2 million. The number hit Hannah like a physical blow. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. $4.2 million. The assets are primarily held in a diversified investment portfolio, Lauren said, but there's also a property component. Your grandmother purchased a penthouse apartment on Central Park West in 1985. It's been maintained by the trust and leased to corporate tenants over the years. As of last month, the lease expired. The property is now yours, free and clear. Hannah's hands had started shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs. I don't understand, she whispered. Why didn't she tell me? Your grandmother left you a letter, Lauren said. She pulled out an envelope, yellowed slightly with age, and passed it across the desk. I think she wanted you to read this when you were ready to hear it. Hannah took the envelope with trembling hands. Her grandmother's handwriting was on the front. To Hannah, when she is finally free. She opened it carefully, pulling out 2 pages of Eleanor's precise script. My dearest Hannah, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means you have finally found your way out of whatever cage you built for yourself. I knew, even when you were a little girl, that you would be the kind of woman who gives everything to the people she loves. I saw it in the way you cared for wounded birds, the way you shared your lunch with children who had none, the way you loved with your whole heart and expected nothing in return. I also knew it would nearly destroy you. Your mother did the same thing, gave herself away piece by piece to a man who loved her but could never quite match the intensity of her devotion. I watched her disappear into that marriage, watched her become smaller and quieter until I barely recognized the brilliant, fierce daughter I had raised. I vowed I would not let the same thing happen to you. This money is not a gift, Hannah. It is a tool. Use it to build a life that belongs to you and no one else. Use it to discover who you are when no one is watching, when no one needs you, when you are accountable only to yourself. Use it to become the woman I always knew you could be, not despite your capacity for love, but because of it. You are not weak for having loved someone who didn't deserve it. You are not foolish for having believed in something that turned out to be a lie. You are strong enough to survive your own heartbreak, and that is the rarest strength of all. Build something beautiful, my darling girl. Build something that cannot be taken away. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. Hannah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before she could trust herself to speak. She knew, Hannah said finally. She knew I would end up here. She hoped you wouldn't, Lauren said quietly, but she prepared for the possibility that you would. She pulled out another set of documents. I've prepared all the necessary paperwork to transfer the assets into your name. The investment portfolio will be managed by Fairfield Capital unless you choose another firm. The penthouse requires your signature to transfer the deed. And there's one more thing. She pulled out a business card and slid it across the desk. The card was black, with silver lettering, Victor Rossi, Private Security and Consulting. Your grandmother retained Mr. Rossi's services as part of the trust, Lauren said. He specializes in protection and discretion for high-net-worth individuals who need to maintain a low profile. Your grandmother believed that inheriting this kind of money could make you a target. Mr. Rossi's fees are paid through the trust for the first year. After that, the decision to retain him is yours. Hannah picked up the card, running her thumb over the raised lettering. A bodyguard? More than that, Lauren said. Mr. Rossi is what people in certain circles call a fixer. He handles problems that require a delicate touch. Your grandmother trusted him implicitly. Hannah looked up sharply. What kind of problems did my grandmother have that required a fixer? Lauren's expression didn't change. Your grandfather's real estate empire wasn't built entirely through conventional means. Eleanor understood the world her husband operated in, and she was pragmatic about the kind of protection wealth requires. Mr. Rossi has been ensuring the trust remains secure and undiscovered for 40 years. He's very good at what he does. Hannah felt like she'd fallen into some alternate reality where her sweet, quiet grandmother was a character in a crime novel. But then again, Eleanor had been a woman who'd survived the cutthroat Manhattan real estate world of the 1970s and 1980s. Perhaps Hannah had never really known her at all. I'll need to think about it, Hannah said. Of course, Lauren agreed. In the meantime, let's get the transfer paperwork completed. You'll have immediate access to the investment portfolio, and I can have the penthouse keys to you by tomorrow morning. By the time Hannah left Lauren's office 2 hours later, she was the owner of $4.2 million, a Central Park West penthouse, and the business card of a man who apparently specialized in making problems disappear. She stood on the sidewalk outside Rockefeller Center and tried to process the fact that her entire life had transformed twice in one day. Once when she'd signed away her marriage, and once when her dead grandmother had given her back her future. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dennis, her attorney. Settlement is official. Building management says you have until Friday 5 p.m. to vacate the penthouse. Sorry, Hannah. She should have felt panic. Instead, she felt something close to joy. She pulled out Victor Rossi's card and dialed the number before she could second-guess herself. He answered on the second ring. Ms. Mercer. His voice was deep, calm, with the faintest trace of an accent she couldn't quite place. I was expecting your call. How did you... Lauren Pierce called me after your meeting, he said smoothly. I assume you have questions. I have a lot of questions, Hannah said. But the first one is, why did my grandmother think I would need a fixer? There was a pause. When Victor spoke again, his voice had changed, less professional, more human. Because she knew the kind of man you married, Ms. Mercer, and she knew what men like that do when they realize they made a mistake. Hannah's blood went cold. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Graham Halstead is not the self-made success story he pretends to be, Victor said. I'm talking about the offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the business partners with connections to some very unpleasant people. I'm talking about the fact that your ex-husband is currently under federal investigation for securities fraud, money laundering, and about a dozen other charges that will put him away for a very long time. Hannah's knees went weak. She sat down hard on a nearby bench. And I'm talking about the fact that when that investigation becomes public, which it will, very soon, Graham is going to remember that he was married to you for 6 years, Victor continued. He's going to remember every conversation you overheard, every dinner party you attended, every piece of paper you might have seen, and he's going to wonder what you know. I don't know anything, Hannah said. He doesn't know that, Victor said, which is why your grandmother made sure you would have someone watching your back. I've been monitoring the investigation for the past 8 months, Miss Mercer. It's about to break wide open, and when it does, you need to be somewhere safe. Hannah thought about the 48 hours she had to leave the Halstead penthouse. Thought about Graham's face when she'd walked out of that conference room. Thought about the way Marcus and Jonathan had refused to meet her eyes. The penthouse on Central Park West, she said. Is it safe? I've personally vetted the building's security, Victor said. It's safe. But I'd like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss additional measures. Your grandmother paid me to keep you alive, Miss Mercer. I intend to honor that contract. Okay, Hannah said, because what else was there to say? Tomorrow. I'll text you the details, Victor said, and the line went dead. Hannah sat on the bench outside Rockefeller Center as the October sun began to set, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in this city, her ex-husband was sitting in his tower, believing he'd won. Somewhere in this city, federal investigators were building a case that would destroy him. And somewhere in this city, a woman who'd been invisible for 6 years was about to become very, very visible. Hannah pulled out her phone and texted Dennis. I'll be out of the penthouse by Friday. Thank you for everything. Then she texted Lauren Pierce. I want to see the apartment tomorrow morning, and I want to know everything my grandmother knew about Graham Halstead. The response came back almost immediately. 9 a.m. I'll have the files ready. Hannah stood up, shouldering her purse, and started walking. She didn't know where she was going, just that she was moving forward, and for the first time in 6 years, she was moving on her own terms. Behind her, the Halstead Tower glittered in the fading light, a monument to a man who'd built an empire on lies. Ahead of her, the city stretched out like a promise. Hannah walked into it, alone and unafraid, and disappeared into the New York night. The Central Park West penthouse was nothing like the sterile showpiece Hannah had left behind. When Lauren Pierce handed her the keys the next morning, Hannah stepped into a space that felt lived in despite years of corporate tenants. Hardwood floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps, crown molding that spoke of old Manhattan craftsmanship, windows that framed Central Park like living paintings. Your grandmother bought this in 1985 for $340,000, Lauren said, walking through the sun-filled living room. Current market value is somewhere north of $6 million, but she never considered selling. She told me once that this apartment was your inheritance, not the money. The money was just to make sure you could keep it. Hannah ran her hand along the marble fireplace mantel, imagining her grandmother standing in this exact spot 40 years ago, looking out at the same view, planning for a granddaughter who wasn't even born yet. The previous tenants moved out clean, Lauren continued. Everything's been professionally cleaned. The furniture and storage is yours if you want it. Your grandmother's original pieces. Otherwise, the apartment is yours to do with as you please. Hannah walked to the windows. 15 stories below, Central Park stretched out in autumn glory, trees burning gold and crimson against the morning light. She could see joggers on the paths, families scattered across the great lawn, the distant glitter of the reservoir. I'll take the furniture, Hannah said. I want to see what she chose. Lauren smiled. I'll have the storage company deliver it tomorrow. She checked her watch. Victor Rossi will be here in 10 minutes. I'll leave you to that conversation. It's not my area of expertise, and honestly, I prefer it that way. What exactly is his area of expertise? Hannah asked. Making problems disappear, Lauren said, and keeping people alive when other people want them dead. Your grandmother trusted him with her life. I suggest you do the same. After Lauren left, Hannah explored the apartment alone. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen that had been updated sometime in the 2000s but still retained its original bones. The master bedroom had an ensuite bathroom with a clawfoot tub positioned to face another wall of windows. Hannah could imagine soaking there, watching the sun set over the park, belonging to herself and no one else. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:30. Hannah checked the video intercom, a security feature that looked recently installed, and saw a man in his late 40s, dark hair touched with silver, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost as much as her grandmother's original down payment on this apartment. His eyes, even through the grainy video feed, were sharp and assessing. She buzzed him up. Victor Rossi moved like someone who'd spent time in the military, economical, precise, aware of every angle and exit. He shook her hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive, and his eyes swept the apartment in a single practiced glance. Ms. Mercer, he said, thank you for seeing me. You said my life might be in danger, Hannah replied. That's motivating. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Your grandmother always said you were direct. I appreciate that quality. He pulled out a slim tablet from his briefcase. May I? Hannah gestured to the couch. They sat, and Victor opened a file on the screen. Graham Halstead is under investigation by the FBI's Securities Fraud Division and the Department of Justice, he began without preamble. The investigation began 18 months ago, triggered by irregularities in the Halstead Capital acquisition of Meridian Technologies. You remember that deal? Hannah did. It had been Graham's crowning achievement, the acquisition that had pushed his net worth into the stratosphere. She'd hosted the celebration dinner, playing the perfect wife, while Graham and his partners had toasted their success with $3,000 bottles of wine. The SEC noticed that several shell companies purchased Meridian stock in the weeks leading up to the acquisition announcement, Victor continued. The stock price jumped 40% the day the deal was announced. Someone made approximately $87 million on those trades. Insider trading, Hannah said, among other things. Victor swiped to another screen, showing a web of corporate entities and offshore accounts. The shell companies trace back to a network of intermediaries, but the FBI has connected them to Graham and his partners, Marcus Webb and Jonathan Chen. They've also uncovered evidence of money laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud. The U.S. Attorney's Office is building a RICO case. Hannah's head was spinning. RICO? Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, Victor said. It's usually reserved for organized crime, but the scope of Graham's operation qualifies. He's been running a criminal enterprise disguised as a legitimate business for at least a decade. I lived with him for 6 years, Hannah said slowly. I never knew. You weren't supposed to know, Victor said. That's why men like Graham marry women like you. Smart enough to be useful, loyal enough to be trusted, but kept far enough outside the business that you can't be held accountable. You were the perfect cover, Miss Mercer. The devoted wife, the charity volunteer, the woman who made him look respectable. The words stung because they were true. Hannah had been a prop in Graham's elaborate performance of legitimacy. When is this investigation going public? She asked. My sources say the indictments will be unsealed within 2 weeks, Victor said. Possibly sooner. The FBI has been waiting for one final piece of evidence, a witness who can testify to Graham's direct involvement. They found that witness 3 days ago. Who? A former accountant named David Reeves. He kept copies of everything: emails, wire transfers, recorded phone calls. He's been in protective custody for the past 72 hours. Victor met her eyes. Graham knows. His attorneys have been scrambling since Wednesday, and when a man like Graham gets cornered, he starts looking for leverage. You think he'll come after me, Hannah said. I think he'll wonder what you know, Victor corrected. I think he'll remember 6 years of dinner parties and business calls taken in your presence and confidential documents left on his home office desk. I think he'll panic, and panicked men make dangerous choices. Hannah thought about the conference room, about the way Graham had looked at her when she'd signed the divorce papers. There'd been relief in his eyes, but also something else: calculation. Like he was already planning his next move. What do you recommend? She asked. Stay visible but protected, Victor said. Don't hide. That makes you look like you have something to hide. Go about your life normally, but let me handle your security. I'll install additional measures in this building, vet anyone who tries to make contact with you, and keep you informed of any developments in the investigation. And if Graham does try something? Victor's expression went cold. Then he'll discover that your grandmother chose me very carefully. There was something in his voice that made Hannah believe him absolutely. There's one more thing, Victor said. He pulled out a thick folder and set it on the coffee table. Your grandmother asked me to compile this for you. It's everything I know about Graham Halstead, his business dealings, his associates, his secrets. She wanted you to understand exactly who you'd married. Hannah stared at the folder. Why? Because knowledge is power, Victor said simply, and because she believed you deserved the truth. After Victor left, promising to return tomorrow with a security specialist to upgrade the apartment's systems, Hannah sat alone with the folder. The late morning sun slanted through the windows, illuminating the space where her grandmother had imagined her building a new life. She opened the folder. 3 hours later, Hannah understood that she hadn't just been married to a white-collar criminal. She'd been married to a man whose business empire was built on a foundation of fraud so extensive it was almost breathtaking in its audacity. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the network of lawyers and accountants and fixers who'd helped him hide money, evade taxes, and manipulate markets. And there, buried in the middle of the file, was something that made Hannah's blood run cold: a photograph of Graham at a restaurant in the Cayman Islands, sitting across from a man Victor's notes identified as Dmitry Kozlov, a Russian oligarch with suspected ties to organized crime. The date on the photograph was from 2 years ago. Hannah remembered that trip. Graham had told her it was a solo business retreat, time to clear his head and plan strategy. She'd stayed home in New York, managing his calendar and hosting his mother for a weekend she'd spent smiling through backhanded compliments about her clothes, her hair, her failure to give Graham children. She'd been so stupid, so willfully blind. Her phone rang, shattering the silence. Unknown number. Hannah almost didn't answer, but some instinct made her pick up. Hello? Hannah Mercer? The voice was male, unfamiliar, with a New York accent that sounded outer borough. My name is Special Agent Robert Chen, FBI. I need to speak with you about your ex-husband. Hannah's heart kicked into overdrive. How did you get this number? From your divorce attorney, Dennis Park, Agent Chen said. Ms. Mercer, I know this must be overwhelming, but I need to ask you some questions about Graham Halstead's business activities during your marriage. I don't know anything, Hannah said automatically. That's what they all say, Chen replied, not unkindly. But 6 years is a long time to live with someone. You'd be surprised what you know without realizing you know it. Hannah thought about Victor's warnings. Am I being investigated? No, Chen said. You're a potential witness, nothing more. We've reviewed your financial records, Ms. Mercer. You have no unexplained assets, no offshore accounts, no connection to any of Halstead's shell companies. As far as we can tell, you're exactly what you appear to be, a woman who got divorced and walked away with nothing. That's accurate, Hannah said. Then help us make sure Graham Halstead pays for what he's done, Chen said. Meet with me. One conversation, completely voluntary. If you genuinely don't know anything useful, I'll leave you alone. But if you do remember something, a name, a phone call, a document you saw, it could make the difference in this case. Hannah looked at the folder spread across her coffee table. I need to think about it. You have 48 hours, Chen said. After that, the indictments go public and everything gets complicated. My number's on your caller ID. Call me, Ms. Mercer. Do the right thing." He hung up before she could respond. Hannah sat in her grandmother's apartment, surrounded by evidence of her ex-husband's crimes, and realized that she was standing at a crossroads. She could stay silent, stay safe, and let the FBI build their case without her. Or she could step into the light, tell them everything she remembered, and become a target. She thought about her grandmother's letter. Build something that cannot be taken away. She thought about 6 years of being invisible. She thought about the way Graham had smiled when she'd signed those divorce papers, so certain he'd won. Hannah picked up her phone and called Victor Rossi. "Miss Mercer," he answered immediately. "What's wrong?" "The FBI just called me," Hannah said. "They want me to testify against Graham." There was a pause. "What did you tell them?" "That I needed to think about it," Hannah said. "Victor, if I do this, if I become a witness, what happens to me?" "You become a liability," Victor said bluntly. "To Graham, to his partners, to everyone who has something to lose from his cooperation or conviction. You'll need serious protection, Ms. Mercer, the kind I can provide, but it won't be subtle." "What if I don't testify?" Hannah asked. "Then you're safe," Victor said. "Invisible again. Just like you've been for 6 years." The words hit home. Hannah closed her eyes. "I'll call you back," she said, and ended the call before Victor could respond. She stood up and walked to the windows, looking out at Central Park. Below, life continued. People jogging, walking dogs, pushing strollers, living their small, safe lives. A week ago, that had been her future. A small, safe life built on the ashes of her marriage, surviving on her grandmother's money, keeping her head down and her mouth shut. But her grandmother hadn't kept her head down. Eleanor Mercer had survived the cutthroat Manhattan real estate world of the 1970s, had built a fortune, had hidden it away for 40 years to protect a granddaughter she knew would need it. Eleanor hadn't been safe. She'd been strong. Hannah picked up her phone and dialed the number from her caller ID. Agent Chen answered on the first ring. "Miss Mercer?" "I'll meet with you," Hannah said, "but not at your office, somewhere public, and I'm bringing someone with me." "Who?" "My security consultant," Hannah said. "His name is Victor Rossi. If you have a problem with that, we can skip the meeting." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Victor Rossi, your grandmother's fixer. I should have known Eleanor Mercer's granddaughter wouldn't walk into a federal building without backup." Another pause. "Fine. Tomorrow, noon, the coffee shop on the corner of 68th and Madison. Come alone except for Rossi. We'll talk." "I'll be there," Hannah said. She hung up and immediately called Victor back. "I'm meeting with the FBI tomorrow," she told him. "I need you there." "Hannah." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and something in his tone made her chest tighten. "Once you do this, there's no going back. You understand that?" "I understand," Hannah said. "I also understand that I spent 6 years being the woman everyone wanted me to be. I'm done with that." Victor was quiet for a long moment. "Your grandmother would be proud of you." "My grandmother," Hannah said, "would tell me to burn his empire to the ground." "Then let's make sure you live long enough to watch it burn," Victor said. "I'll pick you up tomorrow at 11:30. That evening, Hannah ordered takeout, Thai food from a place that delivered, eaten straight from the containers while sitting on the floor of her empty living room. The apartment echoed with potential, with the ghost of her grandmother's presence, with the promise of a life that belonged entirely to her. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Marcus Webb. We need to talk. Call me." Hannah deleted it without responding. Another text, 5 minutes later, this one from Jonathan Chen. "Hannah, I know you must be angry, but whatever the FBI has told you, it's not the whole story. Graham made mistakes, but we're all in this together. Don't make this worse." She deleted that one too. Then her phone actually rang. Constance Halstead. Hannah stared at the screen, watching it ring, imagining Graham's mother in that pristine penthouse, probably furious that her perfect son was facing consequences. Hannah answered. "Mrs. Halstead?" she said, her voice neutral. "You little bitch." Constance's voice was pure venom. "I know the FBI contacted you. I know you're considering talking to them. Let me be very clear about what will happen if you do." "I'm listening," Hannah said calmly. "We will destroy you," Constance said. We have lawyers who will tie you up in litigation for years. We'll claim you were complicit in everything Graham did. We'll make sure every newspaper in this city knows you were a gold digger who married my son for his money and then sold him out when the marriage failed." Hannah laughed. She couldn't help it. The sound surprised even her. "You think this is funny?" Constance hissed. "I think it's hilarious," Hannah said. "You're threatening me with the press?" "Constance, I signed a prenup that left me with nothing. I walked out of my marriage with $847 in my checking account. I'm the opposite of a gold digger. I'm the woman your son used and discarded." "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Constance said. "Actually," Hannah replied, "I have several hundred pages of documentation about exactly who I'm dealing with: shell companies, offshore accounts, wire fraud, money laundering. A photograph of Graham having dinner with a Russian oligarch in the Cayman Islands. Should I go on?" There was dead silence on the other end of the line. "Where did you get that information?" Constance's voice had gone quiet, dangerous. "From someone who's very good at finding information," Hannah said. "And before you threaten me again, understand something. I have copies of everything in multiple locations. If anything happens to me, anything at all, it all goes to the FBI. All of it. Every detail about Graham's business dealings, every name, every account number." "You're bluffing," Constance said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. "Try me," Hannah said. "I spent 6 years being invisible in your family. I learned a lot by watching and listening. I know where the bodies are buried, Constance. Do you really want to find out what else I know?" She hung up before Constance could respond, her heart pounding but her hands steady. Within an hour, she received texts from Sloan, from Marcus, from Jonathan, from 2 other business partners whose names she barely remembered. All of them with variations on the same message. "Don't talk to the FBI. We can work this out. Think about what you're doing." Hannah blocked all of them and turned off her phone. She spent the night in her grandmother's apartment, sleeping on an air mattress Lauren had thoughtfully provided, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like cedar and storage. Through the windows, the city glowed against the night sky, 1,000,000 lights representing 1,000,000 lives. Tomorrow, she would meet with the FBI. Tomorrow, she would step out of the shadows and into the light. Tomorrow, she would stop being invisible. But tonight, she was just Hannah Mercer, granddaughter of Eleanor Mercer, survivor of a marriage that had tried to erase her. Tonight, she was alone in a space that belonged entirely to her, and that was enough. She fell asleep watching the lights of Central Park West, and for the first time in 6 years, she didn't dream about Graham at all. Victor arrived at 11:30 sharp, driving a black SUV with tinted windows that looked like it could survive a missile strike. He got out to open her door, his eyes scanning the street with the kind of vigilance that made Hannah feel both safe and slightly terrified. "How are you feeling?" he asked as they pulled into traffic. "Like I'm about to do something incredibly stupid or incredibly brave," Hannah said. "I haven't decided which." "Usually it's both," Victor said. He glanced at her. "You don't have to do this, you know. You can still walk away." "No," Hannah said. "I really can't." The coffee shop was exactly the kind of place designed for clandestine meetings. Busy enough for anonymity, quiet enough for conversation. Agent Chen was already there, sitting at a corner table with a view of both entrances. He was younger than Hannah expected, maybe early 40s, with tired eyes and the kind of face that had seen too much. Victor did a sweep of the room before allowing Hannah to sit. Chen watched this with amusement. "Mr. Rossi," he said, "your reputation precedes you." "Agent Chen," Victor replied neutrally. He took the seat that gave him the best view of the exits. Chen turned his attention to Hannah. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Mercer. I know this isn't easy." "Tell me what you need to know," Hannah said. For the next hour, Chen asked questions, gentle at first, about Graham's schedule, his business partners, his overseas trips. Then more specific, did she remember names mentioned in phone calls? Did she ever see documents marked confidential? Did Graham ever discuss business deals at home? Hannah answered truthfully. She remembered more than she'd realized, names dropped at dinner parties, phone calls Graham took in his home office with the door half open, documents left on his desk that she'd glanced at while bringing him coffee. She'd been invisible, but invisible people saw everything. "There was a night about 18 months ago," Hannah said slowly, Graham came home late, around 2 in the morning. I was awake. I had insomnia back then. He was on his phone and he sounded angry. He said something like, "I don't care what Dimitri wants. The money isn't moving until the Singapore accounts are clean." Then he saw me and hung up immediately. Chen's eyes sharpened. "You're sure he said Dimitri?" "I'm sure," Hannah said. "I remember because it was an unusual name." Chen and Victor exchanged a look. "That's Dmitry Kozlov," Chen said. "We've been trying to establish a direct connection between Halstead and Kozlov for 8 months. If you're willing to testify to that conversation..." "She's not testifying to anything until we know what kind of protection you're offering," Victor interrupted. "Witness protection if necessary," Chen said. "New identity, relocation, full federal protection." Hannah felt her stomach drop. "I'm not disappearing. I'm not running." "Then what are you doing?" Chen asked, not unkindly. "I'm building a life," Hannah said. "Here, in New York, in my grandmother's apartment. I'm not letting Graham Halstead take that away from me, too." Chen sighed. "Miss Mercer, if you testify against Halstead and we can connect him to Kozlov, you become a target. Not just from Halstead, but from a Russian oligarch with resources we can barely track. I can't protect you if you won't let me." "You can't protect her," Victor said. "But I can." Chen looked at him. "You're good, Rossi, but you're not FBI level good." "I'm better," Victor said flatly. "The FBI has protocols and oversight. I have neither, which means I can do things you can't, go places you won't, and make threats you're legally prohibited from making." "That sounds like you're describing criminal activity," Chen said. "That sounds like I'm describing keeping my client alive," Victor corrected. He leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen, Agent Chen. Hannah is going to give you a formal statement. Everything she remembers, dates and times included. You're going to use that information to build your case. But she's not going into witness protection, and she's not testifying in open court unless absolutely necessary. You find another way to get Halstead and Kozlov. Wire testimony, sealed depositions, whatever legal creativity your prosecutors can muster." "That's not how this works," Chen said. "That's how it's going to work," Victor replied. "Or Hannah walks out of here right now, and you get nothing." Chen looked at Hannah. "Is that what you want?" Hannah thought about her grandmother's apartment, about the life she was just beginning to build. She thought about 6 years of being invisible, of making herself smaller and quieter until she practically disappeared. "I'll give you a statement," Hannah said. Everything I remember. But I'm not hiding, and I'm not running. If you need me to testify eventually, I will. But on my terms, in my city, with my protection." Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a recording device. "Let's start from the beginning," he said. By the time they left the coffee shop 3 hours later, Hannah had given the FBI enough information to connect Graham to Kozlov, to trace money through shell companies, to build a timeline of fraud that stretched back a decade. She'd remembered names, dates, conversations. She'd been a more reliable witness than any of them had expected. "You did good in there," Victor said as they walked back to the SUV. "I remembered everything," Hannah said, and there was wonder in her voice. "I thought I'd been invisible, but I saw everything. I just didn't realize I was seeing it." "That's what men like Halstead count on," Victor said. "They think invisibility means blindness. They're wrong." As they drove back to Central Park West, Hannah's phone rang. Lauren Pierce. "Hannah, we have a problem," Lauren said without preamble. "Graham's attorneys just filed an emergency motion claiming the divorce settlement was finalized under duress. They're trying to reopen the case." "On what grounds?" Hannah asked. "They're claiming you had knowledge of the trust before you signed the papers and deliberately withheld that information to gain sympathy and expedite the settlement," Lauren said. "It's bullshit, but it's going to tie us up in court for months." Hannah felt rage bloom hot and bright in her chest. "He can't do that." "He's doing it," Lauren said. "I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning. We're going to fight this, but I need you prepared for the fact that this is going to get ugly." After Hannah hung up, Victor glanced at her. "What happened?" "Graham's trying to reopen the divorce," Hannah said. "He's claiming I knew about the trust before I signed." Victor's jaw tightened. "He's trying to tie you up legally so you can't testify." If you're involved in contentious divorce proceedings, the FBI will have a harder time using you as a credible witness. Can he do that? He can try, Victor said. But Hannah, you need to understand something. This isn't just about the divorce anymore. This is about Graham trying to discredit you before you can hurt him. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Hannah looked out at the city passing by, at the street she'd walked as Graham's wife, invisible and unimportant. She thought about the woman who'd signed those divorce papers with a steady hand, who'd walked out of that conference room without crying. She wasn't that woman anymore. Let it get worse, Hannah said quietly. I'm done being afraid of Graham Halstead. When they reached her building, Victor walked her up to her apartment and did a full security sweep before allowing her inside. I'm installing additional cameras tomorrow, he said, and I'm going to have someone watching the building 24/7. Is that really necessary? Hannah asked. Victor met her eyes. You just spent 3 hours telling the FBI how to destroy a man with connections to Russian organized crime. Yes, it's necessary. After he left, Hannah stood in her grandmother's apartment and felt the weight of everything settling onto her shoulders. The FBI, the divorce, Graham's counterattack, the target she'd just painted on her own back. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You made a mistake today, Hannah. You should have stayed quiet. Hannah deleted it. Then another text from a different number. We know where you live. She forwarded both messages to Victor, then blocked the numbers. Within 5 minutes, Victor called back. Pack a bag. You're not staying there tonight. I'm not running, Hannah said. You're not running, Victor agreed. You're being smart. There's a difference. Pack a bag, Hannah. I'm coming to get you. An hour later, Hannah was in a hotel room in Midtown, registered under a false name, with Victor in the adjoining room and a security detail in the hallway. She sat on the bed and finally let herself feel the fear she'd been holding back all day. She'd testified against Graham. She'd made herself a target. And somewhere in this city, her ex-husband and his associates were deciding what to do about it. Hannah pulled out her phone and opened the photos. There, saved in a private album, was a picture of her grandmother, Eleanor Mercer, at 70, standing in front of the Central Park West building, smiling with fierce pride. Build something that cannot be taken away, her grandmother had written. Hannah was building it, and she'd be damned if she let Graham Halstead tear it down. The news broke on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after Hannah's meeting with Agent Chen. She was sitting in Lauren's office, reviewing depositions for the divorce motion, when Lauren's assistant rushed in with a tablet. It's everywhere, the assistant said, her voice tight with urgency. Lauren took the tablet and her face went pale. She turned the screen toward Hannah. The headline screamed across every major news outlet. Manhattan billionaire Graham Halstead indicted on federal fraud charges. Below it, a photograph of Graham being led from his penthouse in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. Hannah stared at the image, feeling nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a strange, hollow emptiness where her marriage used to live. The indictment is extensive, Lauren said, scrolling through the article. Wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. They're naming Marcus Webb and Jonathan Chen as co-conspirators. And look at this. They've frozen all of Halstead Capital's assets pending investigation. Hannah read the article twice, her mind racing. The FBI had moved faster than anyone expected. Agent Chen had told her the indictments would take weeks, but here they were, splashed across every screen in America. There's more, Lauren said quietly. She swiped to another article, this one from a financial news site. The SEC is investigating whether the divorce settlement should be voided based on fraudulent asset valuation. They're claiming Graham deliberately undervalued his assets before the divorce to avoid splitting them. Hannah, if they can prove that, you might be entitled to half of everything he actually owns. The words took a moment to penetrate. Half of everything? Graham's real net worth, according to the FBI's asset seizure documents, is somewhere around $340 million, Lauren said. If the divorce settlement was based on fraudulent information, and the evidence suggests it was, you could be looking at a settlement in excess of $150 million. Hannah felt the room tilt. She sat down hard in the leather chair across from Lauren's desk. That's not possible, she whispered. It's not only possible, it's probable. Lauren said. She leaned forward, her expression fierce. Hannah, Graham didn't just cheat on you, he defrauded you. The prenup is valid, but the financial disclosure he provided was falsified. He hid assets, undervalued companies, created shell corporations to hide his true net worth. Everything he told you about his finances during the divorce was a lie designed to keep you from getting what you were legally entitled to. Hannah's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs. What do I do? We file a motion to invalidate the settlement based on fraud, Lauren said. We present the FBI's evidence of Graham's hidden assets. We argue that you entered into the divorce agreement under false pretenses and that the settlement should be recalculated based on Graham's actual net worth. And then what? Hannah asked. Graham's in federal custody. His assets are frozen. What am I supposed to be entitled to? A share of money that's been seized by the government? The criminal seizure and the civil divorce settlement are separate legal matters, Lauren explained. The government will take what they can prove is proceeds of criminal activity. Everything else, legitimate business assets, real estate, investments, that's still subject to divorce law, and you're entitled to half of it. Hannah stood up and walked to the windows. Below, Manhattan hummed with its usual chaos, people rushing to meetings, vendors selling coffee, taxis honking in gridlock. The world hadn't stopped just because hers had exploded. He did this on purpose, Hannah said slowly. He rushed the divorce. He pressured me to sign quickly. He made me feel like I was being difficult for even having an attorney present. All of it was designed to get me out before the indictments came down. And it almost worked, Lauren said. But the timing saved you. If the FBI had waited another month, the divorce would have been final and much harder to challenge. As it is, we have grounds. Hannah turned back to face Lauren. How long will this take? Months, maybe years, Lauren admitted. Graham's attorneys will fight every inch of this. But Hannah, you have something they don't have, the truth. And right now, with Graham facing federal prison, the truth is a very powerful weapon. Hannah's phone rang. Victor. Have you seen the news? He asked without preamble. I'm at Lauren's office, Hannah said. We're looking at it now. Good. Stay there. Don't go back to your apartment yet. Victor's voice was tight with something Hannah couldn't identify. We have a situation. Hannah's stomach dropped. What kind of situation? The kind where Graham made bail 2 hours ago, Victor said, and the first thing he did was send someone to your building. The words hit Hannah like ice water. What do you mean, sent someone? A private investigator named Richard Krause, Victor said. He showed up at your building 30 minutes ago with a camera and started taking pictures of the entrance. My security detail confronted him, and he claimed he was hired by Graham's legal team to document your living situation for the divorce proceedings. But Krause isn't on the approved investigator list for New York Family Court, and his license has 2 complaints for harassment. Where is he now? Hannah asked. Gone. My team escorted him off the property and made it very clear that he wouldn't be welcome back, Victor said. But Hannah, this is just the beginning. Graham's out on bail, he's facing life in prison, and he knows you talked to the FBI. He's going to come at you with everything he has. Lauren was watching Hannah's face, reading the conversation from her expressions. She pulled out her phone and started typing. What do you want me to do? Hannah asked Victor. I want you to let me move you somewhere safer, Victor said. Somewhere Graham doesn't know about. Somewhere I can control the security completely. Hannah thought about her grandmother's apartment, about the space she'd just begun to make her own. The idea of leaving it, of running again, made her chest tight with frustration. No, she said, I'm not abandoning my home. Hannah, I'm not running, Victor, she said firmly. If Graham wants to send investigators, let him. If he wants to threaten me, let him try. I'm done being afraid of him. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Victor spoke again, his voice had changed, less protective, more calculating. All right, he said, then we do this the hard way. Stay at Lauren's office until I call you back. I need to make some arrangements. He hung up before Hannah could ask what kind of arrangements. Lauren looked up from her phone. I just sent an email to the lead prosecutor on Graham's case. I'm informing them that Graham has already violated the conditions of his bail by sending someone to harass a potential witness. That should get him hauled back in front of a judge. Will it help? Hannah asked. It'll make his life more difficult, Lauren said with grim satisfaction. And right now, that's all we can do. 2 hours later, Victor called back. I'm sending a car for you. It'll be there in 10 minutes. Where am I going? Hannah asked. Somewhere safe, Victor said. Trust me. The car was a black sedan with tinted windows and a driver who didn't speak. Hannah sat in the back seat as they drove through Manhattan, watching the city slide past. They headed north, leaving Midtown behind, crossing into unfamiliar territory. 20 minutes later, they pulled up in front of a building Hannah didn't recognize. A converted warehouse in Long Island City, with industrial windows and the kind of understated elegance that spoke of serious money. The driver opened her door and gestured toward the entrance. Victor was waiting in the lobby, along with someone Hannah had never seen before. The man was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that assessed her with the same sharp intelligence she'd seen in Victor's gaze. He was wearing a charcoal suit tailored to accommodate what looked like significant muscle, and there was something about the way he held himself that made Hannah think of soldiers or chess players, people who thought 3 moves ahead. Hannah Mercer, Victor said. This is Santino Rizzo. The name meant nothing to Hannah, but the way Victor said it made it clear this was someone important. Santino extended his hand. Ms. Mercer, Victor has told me about your situation. His voice was deep and controlled, with the faint trace of an accent that suggested Italian heritage. His handshake was firm, his hands surprisingly warm. I'm sorry, Hannah said, confused. Who are you? Someone who owes your grandmother a debt, Santino said simply. And someone who can help you with your Graham Halstead problem. Victor gestured toward the elevator. Let's talk upstairs. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse that made Hannah's Central Park West apartment look modest. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the East River and the Manhattan skyline beyond. The space was furnished with the kind of minimalist luxury that only came from serious wealth and impeccable taste. Santino led them to a seating area near the windows and gestured for Hannah to sit. A woman appeared from somewhere with coffee and pastries, set them on the table, and disappeared again without a word. I don't understand what's happening, Hannah said, looking between Victor and Santino. Who are you? Santino sat across from her, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. I run certain business operations in New York and the surrounding areas, operations that require discretion, loyalty, and the ability to handle problems that can't be solved through conventional means. Hannah's breath caught. You're talking about organized crime. I'm talking about providing services that people need but can't access through traditional channels, Santino corrected smoothly. Protection, enforcement, dispute resolution. I've been doing this work for 20 years, Miss Mercer, and 15 years ago your grandmother saved my life. Hannah stared at him. What? Santino leaned back, his expression distant. I was 27 years old, running protection for some of the smaller businesses in Queens. One of my clients was being extorted by a corrupt building inspector, a man who wanted bribes, sexual favors, and complete control. The client refused. The inspector retaliated by condemning her building, forcing her out of business. He paused, his jaw tight with old anger. That client was your grandmother, Santino continued. She owned a building in Astoria, one of her early investments. The inspector thought he could push her around because she was an older woman without connections. He was wrong. What did she do? Hannah asked. She fought him, Santino said. Not with lawyers or courts. She knew that would take years and cost more than the building was worth. She fought him the old way. She found out who he was working for, who was benefiting from his corruption. And then she came to me. Hannah felt like she'd fallen into an alternate universe. My grandmother went to a mobster? Your grandmother went to someone who could help her, Santino corrected. She offered me a deal. She would provide documentation of the inspector's corruption, records she'd been keeping for months, evidence that would destroy him. In exchange, I would make sure he never bothered her or anyone else again. What happened? Hannah whispered. The inspector ended up in federal prison, Santino said. Your grandmother's evidence was turned over to the FBI through anonymous channels. The inspector's bosses were exposed, and Eleanor Mercer kept her building. He met Hannah's eyes. But that's not why I owe her. What happened next is why. He stood up and walked to the windows, looking out at the city. The inspector's people came after me, Santino said quietly. They blamed me for the takedown, even though I'd only facilitated Eleanor's revenge. They sent 3 men to kill me. I was outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered in an alley in Queens with no way out. Hannah's chest was tight. How did you survive? Eleanor Mercer, Santino said. She'd been having me followed, her own security, making sure I held up my end of the bargain. When her people saw what was happening, she called the police, identified herself as a witness to an attempted murder, and stayed on the line until the cops arrived. Those 3 men went to prison, and I lived. He turned back to face Hannah. Your grandmother didn't have to do that. She'd already gotten what she wanted from me. She could have let me die and protected herself from any blowback. But she didn't. She saved my life, and she never asked for anything in return. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. This was the grandmother she remembered, fierce, protective, willing to fight for what was right, even when it was dangerous. I've been trying to repay that debt for 15 years, Santino said. I've had my people watching over her properties, making sure no one bothered her investments, protecting her interests in ways she never knew about. When she died, I thought the debt died with her. He sat down across from Hannah again. Then Victor called me and told me about you, about Graham Halstead, about the threats you're facing. And you think you can help me, Hannah said slowly. I know I can help you, Santino corrected. Graham Halstead is a white-collar criminal playing at being dangerous. He's hired investigators and lawyers, but he doesn't understand real power. I do. And I'm offering you something no lawyer or FBI agent can provide. Absolute protection and the certainty that Graham will never touch you again. Hannah looked at Victor. You're okay with this? I'm realistic about this, Victor said. I can provide excellent security, Hannah. But Santino can provide something more. The kind of presence that makes people think twice before they make a move. Graham is connected to dangerous people through Dmitry Kozlov. You need someone equally dangerous on your side. Hannah's mind was spinning. She was sitting in a penthouse with a man who'd just casually admitted to running organized crime operations, discussing her protection like it was a business transaction. What would this arrangement look like? She asked carefully. You continue your life exactly as you planned, Santino said. You work with Lauren on the divorce settlement. You cooperate with the FBI on Graham's prosecution. You build whatever future you want to build. Meanwhile, I make sure Graham understands that you are completely off limits. Anyone he sends your way will be dealt with. Any threat he makes will be answered. Any move he considers making against you will be met with consequences he won't survive. You're talking about threatening him, Hannah said. I'm talking about protecting you, Santino replied. Graham Halstead has demonstrated that he's willing to harass you, intimidate you, and potentially harm you to protect his interests. I'm demonstrating that I'm willing to do worse to him if he tries. It's a language men like him understand. Hannah thought about the threatening texts, about the investigator showing up at her building, about the way Graham had looked at her in that conference room, like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person. And what do you want in return? Hannah asked. To repay my debt to your grandmother, Santino said simply. Nothing more. I don't want money. I don't want favors. I don't want leverage over you. I want to make sure Eleanor Mercer's granddaughter survives long enough to build the life Eleanor wanted for her. Hannah looked into Santino's eyes and saw something unexpected, sincerity. Whatever else this man was, whatever crimes he'd committed, his gratitude to her grandmother was real. Okay, Hannah said, but I have conditions. Santino's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. I'm listening. No one gets hurt because of me, Hannah said firmly. I don't care what Graham does or who he sends. No one ends up in a hospital or worse because I accepted your protection. I won't have that on my conscience. Understood, Santino said. Fear is more effective than violence anyway. And I want to know what you're doing, Hannah continued. No surprises. No finding out after the fact that you did something in my name. Complete transparency. Santino nodded. Agreed. Anything else? Hannah thought for a moment. If this gets out, if anyone finds out I have ties to you, it could destroy my credibility with the FBI. It could destroy everything I'm trying to build. No one will know, Santino promised. As far as the world is concerned, you have excellent private security provided by Victor Rossi. What they don't know is that Victor's security is backed by resources they can't track and connections they can't trace. Hannah looked at Victor. You're sure about this? I've known Santino for 5 years, Victor said. He's a man of his word. If he says he'll protect you, he will. And if he says no one will know about his involvement, they won't. Hannah took a deep breath and made a decision that would have terrified her a week ago. All right, I accept your help. Santino stood and extended his hand again. Then as of this moment, Hannah Mercer, you are under my protection. Graham Halstead is going to learn very quickly that he made a serious mistake when he decided to threaten you. That evening, back in her apartment with Victor's upgraded security and the knowledge that somewhere in the city, Santino Rizzo was making arrangements to protect her, Hannah sat at her grandmother's desk and opened her laptop. She'd been thinking about something Lauren had said, about how the divorce settlement could be invalidated based on fraud. She'd been thinking about the women she'd met at charity events over the years, wives who'd looked at her with the same trapped expression she'd seen in her own mirror, women who'd given up careers, identities, independence to marry wealthy men who'd treated them like accessories. Hannah opened a blank document and started typing. 3 hours later, she had the bones of something that made her heart race with possibility. A foundation. A nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women who'd been economically abused in their marriages, women who'd been lied to about assets, pressured into signing away their rights, left with nothing when the marriage ended. She would call it the Ash Rise Initiative. Women rising from the ashes of marriages that had tried to burn them down. She worked until past midnight outlining programs and services, legal support, financial counseling, housing assistance. She researched other nonprofits doing similar work and started making lists of attorneys who might be willing to volunteer their time. When she finally closed her laptop, exhausted but energized, she realized she was building exactly what her grandmother had wanted, something that couldn't be taken away, something that mattered. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victor. Santino's people have made contact with Graham's investigator. The message was received. No further incidents expected. Hannah stared at the text, wondering what exactly message was received meant. But she'd made a deal with herself. She wouldn't ask questions she didn't want answers to. She was about to put the phone down when another text came through, this one from a number she didn't recognize. This is Santino. Sleep well, Ms. Mercer. You're safe tonight. Hannah looked around her grandmother's apartment at the space that was slowly becoming hers. She thought about Graham in his lawyer's office, planning his next move. She thought about the FBI building their case. She thought about the foundation she was going to build, the women she was going to help, and she thought about the fact that somewhere in this city, one of the most dangerous men in New York had just promised to keep her safe. She sent a text back to Santino. Thank you for everything you did for my grandmother and everything you're doing for me. His response came immediately. Eleanor Mercer saved my life. Protecting yours is the least I can do. Hannah fell asleep that night feeling safer than she had in years, which was ironic considering she'd just accepted protection from a man who'd admitted to running criminal operations. But safety, she was learning, wasn't always about following the rules. Sometimes it was about knowing who had your back when the rules stopped applying. The next morning, Hannah woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Her heart jumped into her throat as she grabbed her phone, expecting threats or warnings. Instead, she found messages from old friends she hadn't spoken to in years, former colleagues from her pre-Graham life, even distant relatives she barely remembered. All of them had seen the news about Graham's indictment. All of them wanted to check on her, offer support, or, in a few uncomfortable cases, apologize for believing his version of their divorce. One message stood out from her old college roommate, Sarah. I saw the news about Graham. I'm so sorry for losing touch over the years. I should have stayed in your life even when you disappeared into that marriage. Coffee this week? I want to hear how you're really doing. Hannah stared at the message, feeling something crack open in her chest. She'd spent 6 years isolated, convinced that her old life had moved on without her. But maybe, just maybe, some of those connections could be rebuilt. She was typing a response when her doorbell rang. Hannah checked the video intercom and saw Lauren Pierce looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Let me up, Lauren said urgently. We have a problem. Hannah buzzed her in, her stomach tight with worry. When Lauren stepped into the apartment 2 minutes later, she was carrying a tablet and wearing an expression Hannah had never seen before, something between fury and fear. What happened? Hannah asked. Lauren pulled up a news article and shoved the tablet into Hannah's hands. The headline made Hannah's blood run cold. Halstead's ex-wife inherits millions during FBI investigation. Questions raised about timing and cooperation. The article was a hit piece, carefully crafted to make it look like Hannah had somehow orchestrated the entire investigation to gain access to her grandmother's trust. It suggested she'd known about the inheritance all along, had deliberately waited until after the divorce to claim it, and had cooperated with the FBI specifically to damage Graham's finances before the settlement could be finalized. "This is insane," Hannah whispered. "None of this is true." "I know that, and you know that, but Graham's PR team is very good at their job," Lauren said grimly. "They're trying to discredit you before you can testify. They're planting the narrative that you're a gold digger who manipulated the system." Hannah read through the article, her hands shaking with rage. Everything was twisted, every fact distorted just enough to make her look calculating and mercenary. "The comments are worse," Lauren warned. "Don't read the comments." Hannah read them anyway. Hundreds of strangers calling her a liar, a manipulator, a woman who'd trapped a good man and then destroyed him for money. The words burned like acid. "We're going to sue for defamation," Lauren said. "This article is filled with provable lies. We'll destroy them in court." "That'll take months," Hannah said. "Meanwhile, my reputation is shredded." "Then we fight back faster," Lauren said. She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling a friend at the Times. We're going to tell your side of the story, the truth. The prenup that left you with nothing, the years of emotional abuse, the inheritance you didn't know existed, all of it." Hannah's first instinct was to refuse, to hide, to make herself small again. Then she thought about the Ashrise initiative, about the foundation she wanted to build. If she was going to help other women, she couldn't do it from the shadows. "Okay," Hannah said, "let's tell the truth." 2 days later, the New York Times published a profile titled "The Invisible Wife: How Hannah Mercer Survived Financial Abuse and Found Her Voice." The article was thorough, factual, and damning. It detailed the prenup that had left Hannah with nothing, Graham's affairs, the way she'd been systematically isolated from friends and family. It included quotes from her divorce attorney about the fraudulent asset valuation, from Victor about the threats she'd received, from Agent Chen about her cooperation with the FBI investigation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support for Hannah. The hashtag Invisible No More started trending. Women began sharing their own stories of financial abuse in marriage, of prenups signed under pressure, of divorces that had left them destitute while their exes lived in luxury. Hannah's inbox filled with messages from strangers thanking her for speaking out, from attorneys offering pro bono services for her foundation, from wealthy women offering to fund the Ashrise initiative. But there was also backlash. Graham's supporters doubled down, calling the Times article a sob story designed to gain sympathy. Conservative outlets ran pieces about the dangers of believing women without evidence. And somewhere in the noise, buried in hundreds of messages, were threats. Specific, credible threats about what would happen to women who destroyed good men's lives. Victor showed up at her apartment that evening with Santino. "We need to talk about security," Victor said without preamble. "The threats have escalated. Some of them are just angry trolls, but a few are concerning. People who know details about your schedule, about where you've been." "Graham's people?" Hannah asked. "Possibly," Santino said. "Or Kozlov's. The Russian connections make this more complicated. Victor and I agree that you need to relocate temporarily, somewhere we can control access completely." Hannah felt her chest tighten. "You want me to go into hiding?" "I want you to go somewhere safe while we neutralize the immediate threats," Santino corrected. "A week, maybe 2, long enough for me to make it very clear to everyone involved that you are completely off limits." Hannah walked to the windows, looking out at Central Park. She'd just gotten this apartment. She'd just started building her new life. The idea of leaving again felt like surrender. "Where would I go?" she asked quietly. "I have an estate in Westchester," Santino said. 40 acres, complete security, total privacy. You'd have your own wing, complete freedom of movement within the property. No one would know you were there except Victor, myself, and the security team. Hannah turned to face them. "And you promise this is temporary?" 2 weeks maximum, Santino said. "By then, the people who need to understand the situation will understand it, and you'll be able to return to your life without constantly looking over your shoulder." Hannah thought about the messages filling her phone, about the strangers who knew her schedule. She thought about her grandmother's letter, about building something that couldn't be taken away. "Okay," she said finally. 2 weeks. But I want to keep working on the foundation. I'm not going to hide and do nothing." "Bring your laptop," Santino said. "You'll have everything you need." The Westchester estate was something out of a movie, a converted mansion set on rolling hills surrounded by forest and protected by security that was invisible but omnipresent. Santino gave Hannah a tour personally, showing her the guest wing that would be hers, the library where she could work, the gardens where she could walk. "This is beautiful," Hannah said, looking out at the grounds as the sun set. "It was my father's," Santino said quietly. "He bought it 30 years ago as a legitimate investment, one of the few clean things in his portfolio." He glanced at her. "I'm trying to do the same, build something legitimate, something that isn't tainted by the choices I've made." Hannah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not just the sharp intelligence and controlled power, but something softer. Regret, maybe? Or hope? "Why?" she asked. "Why try to change now?" Santino was quiet for a long moment. "Because men like your grandmother's inspector and men like Graham Halstead exist in the world I've built, and I'm tired of being part of the system that enables them." He met her eyes. "Your grandmother showed me that there's another way, that you can fight corruption without becoming corrupt yourself. I've spent 15 years trying to figure out how to do that. Maybe protecting you is the first step." That night, alone in a guest room that was larger than her first apartment, Hannah worked on the Ashrise initiative until her eyes burned. She drafted mission statements, created program outlines, reached out to attorneys and counselors and financial advisors who'd offered their support. And slowly, in the quiet of Santino's estate, protected by a man who'd built his power in the shadows, Hannah Mercer began to build something that would stand in the light. Hannah had been at the Westchester estate for 5 days when Lauren called with news that changed everything. "They found something," Lauren said, her voice vibrating with barely contained energy. "The FBI forensic accountants went through Graham's files with a microscope. Hannah, the divorce settlement wasn't just based on undervalued assets. It was based on completely fabricated documents." Hannah set down her coffee, her heart suddenly racing. She was sitting in the estate's library, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the forest. "What do you mean, fabricated?" "I mean, the financial disclosure Graham provided during the divorce proceedings was created specifically to defraud you," Lauren said. "The documents were backdated, the valuations were falsified, and at least 3 of the witnesses who signed off on the asset appraisals were paid to lie. The FBI has bank records showing payments from Graham's shell companies to these witnesses 2 weeks before your divorce mediation." Hannah felt the room tilt. He planned this from the beginning. "Worse than that," Lauren said. "The forensic team found emails between Graham and his attorney discussing the strategy." Direct quotes, Hannah. Graham wrote, and I'm reading this verbatim, "We need to get her out before the indictments drop. Lowball everything, make her feel grateful for scraps, and get her signature before she realizes what she's entitled to." His attorney responded with the name of an accountant willing to create false documentation. The words hit Hannah like physical blows. She'd known Graham was ruthless, but this level of premeditation felt surreal. "There's more," Lauren continued. "The prenup is valid, but the asset disclosure made during the divorce completely violated the terms of that prenup. The prenup specified that both parties would provide full and honest financial disclosure in the event of divorce. Graham didn't just undervalue his assets, he actively concealed them. That's grounds for invalidating the entire settlement." Hannah stood and walked to the windows, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. "What happens now?" "Now we go nuclear," Lauren said with grim satisfaction. "I'm filing an emergency motion to vacate the divorce settlement based on fraud, perjury, and violation of the prenuptial agreement. I'm also filing a separate civil suit against Graham for fraud and emotional distress. And Hannah, based on the FBI's findings, you're legally entitled to half of Graham's actual net worth at the time of divorce, which, according to their forensic accounting, was approximately $340 million. The number was so large it felt abstract. Hannah couldn't process it. "That's $170 million, Lauren said, as if Hannah hadn't done the math. plus damages for the fraud itself, plus attorney fees. We're looking at a settlement that could exceed $200 million once everything is calculated. Hannah felt her knees go weak. She sat down hard on the window seat. That's not possible. It's not just possible, it's probable, Lauren said. The evidence is overwhelming. Graham's attorneys will try to argue that the criminal seizure of his assets should take precedence over the civil divorce settlement, but those are separate legal matters. The government gets the proceeds of crime. You get what you were legally entitled to from legitimate assets. But what if there aren't any legitimate assets left after the criminal seizure? Hannah asked. Graham's empire is worth approximately $340 million, Lauren explained. The FBI estimates that about $120 million of that is directly tied to criminal activity. The insider trading, the money laundering, the fraudulent deals, that gets seized. The remaining $220 million represents legitimate business holdings, real estate, and investments. Half of that is yours. Hannah tried to imagine what $110 million looked like. She couldn't. The number was too large, too abstract, too far removed from the woman who'd signed divorce papers with $847 in her checking account. When do we file? Hannah asked. I'm filing the motions this afternoon, Lauren said. I wanted to call you first. Hannah, once these documents become public, it's going to be a media firestorm. The narrative is going to shift from billionaire indicted for fraud to billionaire defrauded his wife during divorce. This is going to get very ugly, very quickly. Good, Hannah said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. Let it get ugly. I'm tired of being the quiet one. After she hung up with Lauren, Hannah sat in the library for a long time, watching the afternoon light filter through the trees. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, invisible, diminished, willing to accept scraps because she'd believed that was all she deserved. That woman was gone. Her phone rang again. This time it was Agent Chen. Ms. Mercer, I need you to come to Manhattan, he said without preamble. We have a development in the Halstead case that requires your immediate attention. Hannah's stomach clenched. What kind of development? The kind I can't discuss over the phone, Chen said. How soon can you get here? Hannah looked out at the estate grounds, at the security that had kept her safe and isolated for nearly a week. I'm in Westchester. I can be there in an hour. Federal Plaza, 10th floor, Chen said. Come to the visitor entrance and ask for me. And Ms. Mercer? Bring your attorney and your security detail. You're going to want them there. Victor drove her into the city in tense silence, while Santino followed in a separate vehicle with 2 members of his security team. Hannah spent the drive trying to prepare herself for whatever Chen needed to tell her, running through possibilities in her mind. None of them were good. Federal Plaza was exactly as imposing as Hannah had imagined, all concrete and authority, designed to make people feel small. But Hannah walked through those doors with her head high, flanked by Victor and Lauren, with Santino and his team maintaining a discreet distance. Agent Chen met them in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and stress. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Thank you for coming, Chen said. He gestured to the chairs around the table. Please sit. Once they were seated, Chen pulled out a file folder and set it on the table. This morning, we arrested a man named Alexei Volkov at JFK Airport. He was attempting to board a flight to Moscow using a fake passport. Hannah's chest tightened. Who is he? An enforcer for Dmitry Kozlov, Chen said. We've been watching him for weeks. He entered the country 3 days ago, and our surveillance team tracked him to a hotel in Midtown. This morning, he made contact with someone we've had under surveillance for months, a private investigator named Richard Krause. The name hit Hannah like ice water. That's the man Graham sent to my apartment. Correct, Chen said. Krause met with Volkov and provided him with detailed information about you. Your address, your daily routine, photographs, everything. In exchange, Volkov gave Krause $50,000 in cash. The implications crashed over Hannah in waves. Graham hired someone to kill me. We don't have direct evidence that Halstead ordered a hit, Chen said carefully. But we have evidence that his investigator provided information to a known enforcer for a Russian criminal organization. We have Krause in custody, and he's cooperating. He claims Graham told him to find out everything about Hannah's new life and report back to interested parties. Krause says he didn't know Volkov was an enforcer, Just that he was well paid and very interested in your whereabouts. Victor's expression had gone cold and dangerous. Beside Hannah, Lauren had gone pale. "What happens to me now?" Hannah asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "You stay exactly where you are," Chen said. "Wherever Victor Rossi has you stashed, you stay there until we can guarantee your safety. Volkov is in federal custody, but Kozlov has resources we can't fully track. If he wanted you dead, he could send someone else." "Why would Kozlov want me dead?" Hannah asked. "I'm not a threat to him." "You're a witness who can connect Graham Halstead to Dmitry Kozlov," Chen said. "You overheard that phone conversation about the Singapore accounts. If you testify to that, it establishes a direct link between Halstead and a Russian oligarch currently under sanction by the U.S. government. That's a problem for Kozlov, and he solves problems by eliminating them." Hannah felt fury bloom hot and bright in her chest. "So, Graham sold me out to save himself. He told Kozlov I was a threat, and Kozlov sent someone to handle it." "That's our working theory," Chen said. "We're building a case, but it takes time. Meanwhile, you need to stay protected and out of sight." Santino, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. "How long are we talking about?" Chen looked at him with the kind of assessment cops reserved for people they knew were dangerous but couldn't quite prove it. "You're Santino Rizzo." "I'm Ms. Mercer's security consultant," Santino said evenly. "How long does she need to stay in protective custody?" "Until we can either flip Halstead or neutralize Kozlov as a threat," Chen said. "Could be weeks, could be months." "That's unacceptable," Santino said. "Ms. Mercer has a life to build. She has a foundation to launch. She can't do that from hiding." "She can't do any of that if she's dead," Chen shot back. The two men stared at each other across the table, and Hannah saw something pass between them, a recognition of similar natures, of men who operated in worlds where violence was a tool rather than a last resort. "What if we bring Halstead in?" Hannah asked, breaking the tension. "If he's in custody, he can't communicate with Kozlov." "Halstead's out on bail," Chen said. "His attorneys have made sure he has minimal restrictions. We can't just throw him back in jail without cause." "You have cause," Lauren said sharply. "He hired an investigator who passed information to a Russian enforcer. That's conspiracy to commit murder. That's a bail violation at minimum." Chen shook his head. "Kraus claims he didn't know Volkov was an enforcer. Halstead will claim the same, that he hired Kraus for a legitimate purpose and had no knowledge of what Kraus did with the information. Without direct evidence linking Halstead to Kozlov's hit order, we can't make it stick." "Then get the evidence," Santino said. "Flip Kraus completely. Offer him immunity, witness protection, whatever it takes. Make him testify that Halstead knew exactly what he was doing." "We're working on it," Chen said. "But these things take time." "Time Ms. Mercer doesn't have," Santino replied. Hannah stood up, suddenly unable to sit still. She walked to the windows overlooking the city, pressing her hands against the glass. "I'm not hiding for months. I'm not putting my life on hold because Graham Halstead and Dmitry Kozlov want me dead." "Hannah," Victor started, but she cut him off. "No," Hannah said, turning to face the room. "I spent 6 years making myself invisible because it was safer. I'm not doing it again. If Graham wants me dead, he's going to have to watch me build my foundation, launch my programs, and help other women escape the same trap he put me in. He's going to have to watch me live." "That's a brave speech," Chen said quietly, "but bravery doesn't stop bullets." "No," Santino said, standing, "but I do." He looked at Chen. "Ms. Mercer is under my protection. You do your job and build your case against Halstead and Kozlov. I'll do mine and keep her alive while you do it." Chen's expression suggested he had opinions about Santino's methods, but he was smart enough not to voice them. "Fine, but if anything happens to her—" "It won't," Santino said with absolute certainty. On the drive back to Westchester, Hannah sat in silence while Victor navigated through traffic. Santino followed in his vehicle, a constant presence in the rearview mirror. "You shouldn't have challenged Chen like that," Victor said finally. "He's trying to help." "He's trying to put me in a cage and call it protection," Hannah replied. "I'm done with cages." Victor glanced at her. "Your grandmother would say the same thing. She was fearless, but she was also smart. There's a difference between bravery and recklessness." "Then help me be smart. Hannah said. "Help me figure out how to live my life without getting killed in the process." Back at the estate, Santino called an emergency meeting in his office. Hannah, Victor, and three of Santino's senior security people gathered around a conference table while Santino pulled up surveillance photos and maps on a large screen. "Here's what we know," Santino began. "Kozlov sent Volkov to eliminate Hannah. Volkov is in custody, but Kozlov has at least a dozen other enforcers operating in the U.S. Any one of them could be activated to finish the job." He pulled up a photograph of a middle-aged man with sharp features and cold eyes. This is Dmitry Kozlov. He's currently in Moscow, beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement. He has assets in the U.S. worth approximately $2 billion, most of it held through shell companies and proxies. He's been under investigation for years, but he's careful. Very little direct evidence connecting him to criminal activity. "How do we stop him?" Hannah asked. "We don't," Santino said bluntly. "Kozlov is untouchable as long as he stays in Russia. But we can make it clear that coming after you is more trouble than it's worth. We can make the cost of killing you higher than the benefit of silencing you." "How?" Hannah asked. Santino smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "By making sure Kozlov understands that if anything happens to you, everything he's built in the U.S. gets destroyed. His shell companies, his assets, his business partners, all of it exposed and dismantled." "You're talking about blackmail," Victor said. "I'm talking about mutually assured destruction," Santino corrected. "Kozlov operates on a principle of cost-benefit analysis. Right now, the benefit of silencing Hannah outweighs the cost because he thinks the cost is minimal. Send an enforcer, eliminate the witness, problem solved. We need to change that equation." "And how do we do that?" Hannah asked. Santino pulled up another screen, this one showing a network of corporate entities and offshore accounts. "I've spent the last 3 days having my people dig into Kozlov's U.S. operations. We've identified approximately $800 million in assets that could be exposed to law enforcement with the right information. We've also identified 3 of his key business partners who are U.S. citizens and therefore vulnerable to prosecution." He looked at Hannah. "Here's the deal we're going to offer Kozlov. Leave Hannah Mercer alone, and his U.S. operations continue unmolested. Touch her, and everything burns. We provide the FBI with detailed information about his shell companies, his money laundering operations, his business partners. We destroy his entire U.S. presence. He'll never believe you have that kind of information," Hannah said. "He'll believe it when we give him a sample," Santino said. He pulled out his phone and showed Hannah a document. "This is the corporate registration for one of Kozlov's shell companies in Delaware. It lists 3 board members, all of them fake identities. We're going to send this document to one of Kozlov's attorneys in New York, along with a message. We have everything, and we're willing to use it." Hannah stared at the document, her mind racing. "This is insane." "This is necessary," Santino corrected. "Kozlov understands power and leverage. Right now, he thinks killing you gives him leverage over Halstead, silences a witness, sends a message, maintains control. We're going to show him that killing you costs him everything he's built in this country." "And if he calls our bluff?" Victor asked. "Then we weren't bluffing," Santino said simply. "We hand everything to the FBI and let them tear apart Kozlov's empire. It won't bring Hannah back, but it'll make sure Kozlov pays for it." The room was silent for a long moment. "Do it," Hannah said. Santino nodded and picked up his phone. He made a call, spoke briefly in Italian, and hung up. "It's done. The message will be delivered to Kozlov's attorney within the hour. We'll have a response by tomorrow." That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She stood on the balcony of her guest room, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars above the Westchester Hills. The city was aglow on the southern horizon, and somewhere in that glow, Graham was sitting in his lawyer's office or his mother's penthouse, believing he'd won. "You should be inside." Hannah turned to find Santino standing in the doorway. He was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking more human than she'd seen him. "I needed air," Hannah said. Santino stepped onto the balcony, maintaining a respectful distance. "You're thinking about tomorrow." "I'm thinking about how my life became something out of a crime novel," Hannah said. 3 weeks ago, I was signing divorce papers and wondering where I was going to sleep. Now I'm in the middle of a war between the FBI and a Russian oligarch.
You're not in the middle of it, Santino said quietly. You're the reason for it. There's a difference. Hannah looked at him. You really think your message will work? That Kozlov will just back off? I think Kozlov is a businessman who understands cost-benefit analysis, Santino said. And I think losing $800 million and 3 key associates is too high a price to pay for silencing one witness, especially when the FBI already has other evidence against Halstead.
And if you're wrong, Santino met her eyes, and she saw absolute certainty there. Then I'll make sure you survive long enough for the FBI to put both Halstead and Kozlov away for life. That's my promise to your grandmother, and I don't break promises. They stood in silence for a while, watching the distant city lights. Can I ask you something? Hannah said finally. Of course. Why did you really agree to help me? Hannah asked. I know you owed my grandmother a debt, but this, what you're doing, is so far beyond repaying a favor. You're risking your own safety, your organization's resources, everything. Why? Santino was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Because your grandmother saw something in me that no one else did, he said. When she saved my life, she didn't just call the police and disappear. She stayed. She testified in court, even though it put a target on her back. She looked at a criminal from Queens and saw someone worth saving. And after the trial, she found me and she said something I've never forgotten. What did she say? Hannah asked. She said, the world will tell you that you are what you've done. But I'm telling you that you are what you choose to do next, Santino said. She told me I had a choice. I could keep being the person the world expected me to be. Or I could become someone different, someone better. He looked at Hannah. I've spent 15 years trying to figure out how to be that person, helping you, protecting you. This is the closest I've come to being the man your grandmother believed I could be. So no, it's not just about repaying a debt. It's about honoring the woman who gave me a second chance at becoming something more than a criminal. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. She would be proud of you. She would be proud of you, Santino corrected. You're doing exactly what she wanted, building something that matters, refusing to be diminished, standing up to men who think power gives them the right to destroy people. You're your grandmother's legacy, Hannah. Not the money, not the apartment. You. The next morning, Hannah woke to the sound of her phone ringing. She grabbed it, still half asleep, and saw Lauren's name on the screen. The motions are filed, Lauren said without preamble. As of 8 o'clock this morning, your request to vacate the divorce settlement is officially on the court docket. And Hannah, the media is going insane. Every major outlet is running the story. Billionaire accused of defrauding wife during divorce. The evidence is public record now, the backdated documents, the paid witnesses, the emails between Graham and his attorney. He's finished. Hannah sat up, her heart pounding. What's Graham saying? His attorneys released a statement claiming the allegations are false and motivated by your desire for revenge, Lauren said. But nobody's buying it. The evidence is too strong. Even his supporters are starting to distance themselves. What happens next? Emergency hearing in 3 days, Lauren said. The judge wants to review the evidence and determine if the settlement should be vacated pending a full trial. Graham will fight it, but honestly, Hannah, I don't see how he wins this. The fraud is too blatant, too well documented. After she hung up, Hannah found Santino in his office, on the phone speaking rapid Italian. He saw her and held up one finger, finishing his conversation before hanging up. Kozlov responded, he said, without preamble. Hannah's stomach clenched. And? He's agreed to back off, Santino said. His attorney sent a message this morning confirming that Kozlov has no interest in Ms. Hannah Mercer and wishes her well in her future endeavors. Its lawyers speak for point taken, threat received, we're done here. Hannah felt her knees go weak with relief. It worked. Your message actually worked. Kozlov isn't stupid, Santino said. He ran the numbers and realized that protecting Halstead wasn't worth losing his U.S. empire. He's cutting his losses and moving on. What about Graham? Hannah asked. Won't he try something else? Graham's out of options, Santino said. His Russian connection just abandoned him. His assets are frozen. The FBI has him dead to rights on multiple charges, and now the divorce fraud is public, so his reputation is destroyed. He's got nothing left to fight with. Hannah sat down in one of the leather chairs, letting the reality sink in. It's over. The threat is actually over. The immediate threat is over, Santino corrected.
Graham's still going to fight the divorce settlement. The FBI case will take months to go to trial. But in terms of physical danger, yes, you're safe now. Hannah looked up at him.
When can I go home? Tomorrow if you want, Santino said. Victor will continue providing security, but you can return to your apartment and your life. You're free, Hannah. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Free. After 6 years of marriage, after weeks of threats and fear and hiding, she was finally, truly free. Thank you, Hannah said, and the words felt inadequate for everything Santino had done. For all of this. For keeping me safe. For keeping your promise to my grandmother.
Santino smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Thank you for reminding me why I made that promise in the first place. Your grandmother believed people could change, could become better than their worst choices. You've given me a chance to prove her right. That evening, Hannah packed her belongings and prepared to return to Manhattan. She stood in the guest room that had been her sanctuary for nearly 2 weeks, looking out at the Westchester Hills one last time. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, her old college roommate. Coffee tomorrow? I want to hear about this foundation you're building. Maybe I can help. Hannah smiled and typed back, Tomorrow sounds perfect. I'll tell you everything. She was about to put the phone down when another message came through, this one from Agent Chen. Kraus is cooperating fully. He's confirmed that Halstead specifically asked him to pass information to interested parties with Russian connections. Combined with Volkov's arrest, we have enough to charge Halstead with conspiracy to commit murder. Bail is being revoked tomorrow. He's going back into custody. Hannah read the message twice, letting it sink in. Graham was going to prison, not just for fraud, but for trying to have her killed. The man who'd made her feel invisible, who'd systematically destroyed her sense of self-worth, who'd believed he could erase her completely. That man was going to spend the rest of his life in a cage. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she just felt tired and ready to move forward. Victor knocked on her door. Car's ready when you are. Hannah took one last look around the room, then picked up her bag. I'm ready. As they drove back to Manhattan, the city rising before them in the twilight, Hannah thought about everything that had changed in 3 weeks. She'd gone from invisible to infamous, from penniless to wealthy, from victim to survivor. She'd discovered a grandmother's love that had transcended death, and she'd found protectors in the most unlikely places. And tomorrow, she would return to her apartment on Central Park West and begin building the life her grandmother had imagined for her. A life that belonged to no one but herself. A life that could never be taken away. The Ash Rise initiative would launch in 3 months, funded by her grandmother's trust, and eventually by the settlement she would win from Graham's empire. Women across the country would have access to legal support, financial counseling, and the knowledge that economic abuse in marriage was a crime that could be fought and won. Hannah Mercer was no longer invisible. She was just getting started. The emergency hearing took place on a Friday morning in a Manhattan courthouse that had seen countless divorces, but none quite like this one. Hannah sat beside Lauren at the plaintiff's table, wearing a navy suit that her grandmother would have approved of, professional, elegant, and chosen by no one but herself. Across the aisle, Graham's legal team occupied their table with the kind of tense energy that came from knowing they were fighting a losing battle. Graham himself was absent, having been remanded to federal custody 3 days earlier when Agent Chen's evidence of conspiracy to commit murder had convinced a judge to revoke his bail. His mother Constance sat in the gallery behind his attorneys, her face a mask of fury barely contained beneath expensive makeup. Judge Sarah Martinez entered the courtroom with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who'd been doing this job for 20 years and had seen every variation of human greed and deception. She was in her late 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Let's be clear about what we're here to decide, Judge Martinez said, settling into her chair and looking over the documents before her. Miss Mercer is requesting that this court vacate the divorce settlement on grounds of fraud, perjury, and material misrepresentation. Mr. Halstead's attorneys are opposing this motion. Ms. Pierce, you may proceed. Lauren stood, and Hannah felt a surge of gratitude for this woman who'd fought for her from the beginning. Your Honor, the evidence before you demonstrates a systematic and deliberate fraud perpetrated by Graham Halstead during divorce proceedings, Lauren began. Mr. Halstead provided financial disclosures that were not merely inaccurate, they were fabricated.
Documents were backdated. Witnesses were paid to lie, and assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars were deliberately concealed. She pulled up the first exhibit on the courtroom screen, an email from Graham to his attorney. This email, dated 2 weeks before the divorce mediation, shows Mr. Halstead explicitly discussing a strategy to lowball everything and get Mrs. Mercer's signature before she realizes what she's entitled to. These are his exact words. Your Honor. Judge Martinez read the email, her expression growing colder with each line. Furthermore, Lauren continued, the FBI's forensic accounting has revealed that Mr. Halstead's actual net worth at the time of divorce was approximately $340 million. The financial disclosure he provided to Ms. Mercer claimed his net worth was $47 million. That's not a valuation dispute, Your Honor. That's fraud. Graham's lead attorney, a man named Richard Thornton who looked like he charged $1,000 an hour, stood up. Your Honor, if I may— You may not, Judge Martinez said sharply. You'll have your turn, Mr. Thornton. Sit down. Thornton sat, his jaw tight. Lauren spent the next hour methodically destroying every aspect of Graham's financial disclosure. She presented the backdated documents, the bank records showing payments to witnesses, the shell companies created specifically to hide assets. She showed emails, text messages, and recorded conversations that painted a picture of a man who'd planned his wife's financial destruction with the same cold calculation he'd used to build his empire. When she finally sat down, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of Constance Halstead's sharp breathing. Mr. Thornton, Judge Martinez said, your response? Thornton stood, and Hannah could see him mentally recalibrating his strategy in real time. Your Honor, while we acknowledge that there may have been some irregularities in the financial disclosure process, we maintain that these were the result of accounting errors rather than deliberate fraud. Mr. Halstead relied on the advice of his financial team who— Stop, Judge Martinez said. She held up the email Lauren had presented. Mr. Thornton, I'm looking at an email where your client explicitly discusses deceiving his wife about his assets. That's not an accounting error. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. Your Honor, we would argue that the email is being taken out of context. Then provide me with the context that makes get her signature before she realizes what she's entitled to sound like anything other than fraud, Judge Martinez said. Thornton opened his mouth, closed it, and seemed to deflate slightly. Your Honor, we request a continuance to review the evidence and prepare a more comprehensive response. Denied, Judge Martinez said. She looked down at the documents before her, and Hannah could see her making a decision that would change everything. Here's what I see, Mr. Thornton. I see a man who spent 6 years married to a woman he systematically diminished and controlled. I see a man who, when that marriage ended, saw an opportunity to complete her financial destruction. And I see a man who believed he could get away with it because his wife had been trained to accept whatever scraps he chose to give her. Judge Martinez looked directly at the space where Graham would have been sitting if he hadn't been in federal custody. But Ms. Mercer is not accepting scraps anymore, and this court is not in the business of enforcing settlements obtained through fraud. She picked up her gavel. The divorce settlement is hereby vacated in its entirety. The case is remanded to family court for a complete reassessment of assets and the calculation of an equitable distribution based on Mr. Halstead's actual net worth at the time of divorce. Ms. Mercer, you are entitled to half of all legitimate assets as specified in your prenuptial agreement, using accurate valuations rather than the fraudulent documents previously provided. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Hannah felt Lauren's hand squeeze hers under the table. Behind Graham's legal team, Constance Halstead stood up and walked out of the courtroom, her heels clicking like gunshots against the marble floor. Additionally, Judge Martinez continued, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for possible criminal charges related to perjury and fraud in family court proceedings. Mr. Halstead is already facing federal charges, but the fraud committed in my courtroom deserves its own prosecution. She looked at Hannah directly for the first time. Ms. Mercer, I've been doing this job for 2 decades. I've seen powerful men try to destroy their wives in 1,000 different ways, but I've rarely seen fraud this blatant or cruelty this calculated. I hope you use your settlement to build something that helps other women avoid the trap you escaped. I will, Your Honor, Hannah said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall.
I already am.
Outside the courthouse, the media was waiting. Hannah had expected this, had prepared for it with Lauren's help, but nothing could have prepared her for the wall of cameras and shouted questions that greeted them on the courthouse steps. Ms. Mercer, how do you feel about the judge's ruling? Will you be seeking the full $170 million? What's your response to Constance Halstead's statement that you're a gold digger? Lauren stepped forward, her hand on Hannah's shoulder. Ms. Mercer will be making a brief statement, and then we're done for the day. Hannah took a breath and stepped up to the microphones. She'd written notes, practiced what she wanted to say, but standing there looking at the cameras that represented millions of people watching, she put the notes aside and spoke from her heart. 3 weeks ago, I signed divorce papers that left me with nothing, Hannah said. I walked out of my marriage with $847 in my checking account and no idea how I was going to survive. I thought that was what I deserved because I'd spent 6 years being told I was lucky to have what little I had. Her voice didn't shake. That surprised her. But my grandmother, Eleanor Mercer, knew something I'd forgotten, Hannah continued. She knew that love should never cost you your dignity, your independence, or your sense of self-worth. She knew that marriage should be a partnership, not a hostage situation. And she knew that women who give everything to their marriages deserve better than to be discarded like trash when those marriages end. She could see people in the crowd nodding, could see some of the female reporters with tears in their eyes. The Ashrise Initiative launches in 6 weeks, Hannah said. It's a foundation dedicated to helping women who've experienced economic abuse in their marriages, women who've been lied to about assets, pressured into signing unfair prenups, or left destitute when their marriages ended. We'll provide legal support, financial counseling, housing assistance, and most importantly, we'll provide the message that you are not alone and you are not powerless. She paused, gathering herself for the final piece. Graham Halstead tried to erase me, Hannah said. He tried to make me so small and so quiet that I would disappear completely, but I'm standing here today, in front of all of you, very much visible and very much alive. And I'm going to use every dollar of my settlement to make sure that other women know they can survive their own erasure too. The questions started immediately, but Lauren guided her down the steps to the waiting car. Victor was there, along with 2 of Santino's security team, creating a path through the crowd. As they drove away, Hannah looked back at the courthouse steps and saw dozens of women standing there, some with signs, some just watching. One woman held a sign that read, "I was invisible too." Another, "Thank you for speaking up." Hannah felt something break open in her chest. Not pain, but release. She'd spent 6 years being invisible, and now women across the country were telling her they'd been invisible too. But they weren't invisible anymore. None of them were. The settlement negotiations took another 8 weeks. But they were 8 weeks Hannah spent building rather than hiding. She returned to her Central Park West apartment and filled it with her grandmother's furniture from storage, pieces that Eleanor had chosen, pieces that carried history and meaning. She hired a small staff for the Ashrise Initiative, working with Lauren to find attorneys and counselors who understood economic abuse and were passionate about fighting it. And she worked with Santino. It started professionally, meetings about security protocols for the foundation's offices, discussions about protecting the women who would seek their help. But somewhere along the way, the conversation shifted. They'd have dinner at the estate in Westchester, ostensibly to discuss foundation business, and end up talking about everything else. Books they'd read, places they'd traveled, the people who'd shaped them. Hannah learned that Santino was trying to transition his organization away from criminal enterprises and toward legitimate business. He'd been using the past 5 years to slowly divest from illegal operations and invest in real estate, security consulting, and other lawful ventures. It was a slow process, complicated by the fact that leaving the criminal world wasn't as simple as filing paperwork, but he was committed to it. "Your grandmother told me that people can change," Santino said one evening. They were sitting in his library, rain pattering against the windows. "But I'm starting to think that's only half true. People can change what they do, but the person underneath stays the same. I'm still the same man who ran protection rackets in Queens. I've just found different ways to use those skills." "My grandmother also told me that we are what we choose to do next," Hannah reminded him. "You're choosing to build something legitimate. That matters." "Does it?" Santino asked. "When I lie awake at night, I don't think about the legitimate businesses I'm building. I think about the people I hurt when I was younger, the choices I made that can't be undone. Changing your actions doesn't erase your history. Hannah thought about Graham, about the 6 years she'd lost to a marriage built on lies. No, but it gives you a different future. That has to count for something. Santino looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You give me hope, Hannah Mercer. You make me believe that redemption might actually be possible. Before Hannah could respond, her phone rang. Lauren. We have a settlement offer, Lauren said without preamble. Graham's attorneys want to avoid a protracted trial. They're offering $140 million in assets and cash, to be paid out over 18 months as the criminal asset seizures are finalized and legitimate holdings are identified. Hannah's hand tightened on the phone. $140 million. It's less than half of his actual net worth. But given the criminal seizures, it's probably close to the maximum we can realistically extract from his legitimate holdings, Lauren explained. We can fight for more, but it'll take years and cost millions in legal fees. Or we can accept this offer and you can move on with your life. Hannah looked at Santino, who was watching her with quiet attention. She thought about her grandmother's letter, about building something that couldn't be taken away. She thought about the women waiting for the Ash Reese initiative to open its doors, women who needed help now, rather than after years of litigation. Accept the offer, Hannah said. Let's end this. Are you sure? Lauren asked. We could probably get another 20 or 30 million if we... I'm sure, Hannah said. I don't need more money, Lauren. I need closure. After she hung up, Santino refilled her wine glass. That was a smart decision. It was the right decision, Hannah corrected. There's a difference between smart and right. Smart would be fighting for every dollar. Right is recognizing that I already have more than enough and using my time to help people rather than punish Graham. He deserves to be punished, Santino said quietly. He's going to spend the next 20 years in federal prison, Hannah replied. I'd say that's punishment enough. I'm not interested in revenge anymore, Santino. I'm interested in building something that lasts. 2 weeks later, the settlement was finalized. Hannah signed the documents in Lauren's office, her hand steady, her conscience clear. $140 million in assets would be transferred to her over the next 18 months, with the first payment of $30 million arriving within 30 days. What are you going to do with it all? Lauren asked after the paperwork was complete. Half goes to the Ash Rise Initiative endowment, Hannah said. That ensures the foundation can operate in perpetuity, helping women for generations. The other half gets invested in a diversified portfolio that will grow over time. I'm not interested in spending it on yachts or mansions or any of the things Graham thought were important. I'm interested in security, independence, and the ability to help people. Lauren smiled. Your grandmother would be so proud of you. I hope so, Hannah said softly. The Ash Rise Initiative officially launched on a Tuesday morning in November, exactly 6 months after Hannah had signed her divorce papers. The ribbon-cutting ceremony took place at their new offices in Midtown, a space that Hannah had designed to feel warm and welcoming rather than institutional. There were private consultation rooms for legal meetings, a resource library, a children's play area for women who needed childcare during their appointments, and a coffee bar because Hannah believed that difficult conversations should happen in comfortable spaces. The media coverage was extensive. Hannah had become something of a symbol, the invisible wife who'd found her voice, the victim who'd become an advocate. She did interviews with major news outlets, telling her story over and over because she knew that every time she spoke, another woman somewhere realized she didn't have to accept the unacceptable. But the most meaningful moment came 3 weeks after the launch, when a woman named Jennifer walked into the Ash Rise Initiative offices with 2 children and a black eye she'd tried to cover with makeup. I saw you on the news, Jennifer said, her voice shaking. You talked about being invisible in your marriage, about being told you were lucky to have what little you had. That's me. That's my life, and I need help. Hannah sat with Jennifer in one of the consultation rooms and listened to a story that was heartbreakingly familiar. A husband who controlled all the money, who threatened to leave her with nothing if she ever tried to leave, who'd isolated her from friends and family until she had nowhere to go. You're not invisible, Hannah said when Jennifer finished. And you're not powerless. We're going to help you. And they did. The Ash Rise Initiative's attorneys reviewed Jennifer's financial situation, discovered that her husband had been hiding assets, and helped her file for divorce with a full accounting of everything he owned. The foundation's counselors worked with Jennifer to rebuild her confidence and independence. The housing assistance program helped her find a safe apartment where her husband couldn't find her. 6 months later, Jennifer came back to the Ash Rise Initiative offices, but this time she wasn't there as a client. She was there to volunteer. "You saved my life," Jennifer told Hannah. "I want to help save someone else's." Hannah hugged her, feeling the full circle of her grandmother's gift. Eleanor had saved her, and now Hannah was saving others, who would in turn save more. It was a legacy that would ripple forward through time, touching lives that Eleanor would never know about, but had made possible. By the following spring, the Ash Rise Initiative had helped over 300 women navigate divorces, negotiate settlements, and escape economically abusive marriages. The foundation had expanded to include offices in 3 additional cities with plans for more. And Hannah's story had sparked a national conversation about financial abuse in marriage, leading to changes in family court procedures and increased protections for economically vulnerable spouses. Graham's criminal trial took place in April, nearly a year after his indictment. Hannah didn't attend. She had no desire to see him again, no need for closure that required his presence. But she read the verdict when it came through, guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to 23 years in federal prison. Marcus Webb and Jonathan Chen had taken plea deals, agreeing to testify against Graham in exchange for reduced sentences. They would each serve 5 years. Dmitry Kozlov remained in Russia beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement, but his American assets had been seized and his business operations dismantled. He'd lost nearly $1 billion, and the message had been received throughout the criminal underworld. Touching Hannah Mercer cost more than it was worth. Richard Krause, the investigator who'd passed information to Kozlov's enforcer, was serving 7 years for conspiracy to commit murder. He'd cooperated with prosecutors, providing detailed testimony about Graham's instructions to find Hannah's location and share it with interested Russian parties. Constance Halstead had disappeared from public life, selling her penthouse and moving to her vacation home in Palm Beach. Sloan had released a statement distancing herself from her brother and expressing support for Hannah's foundation, though Hannah suspected that was more about reputation management than genuine remorse. As for Hannah herself, she discovered that building a meaningful life was harder and more rewarding than she'd imagined. The foundation consumed her time and energy, but in the best possible way. She reconnected with old friends like Sarah, who'd become the Ash Rise Initiative's volunteer coordinator. She developed new friendships with the women she worked with, relationships based on mutual respect rather than social climbing, and she spent time with Santino. What had started as a professional relationship built on protection and debt had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. They had dinner together several times a week, sometimes discussing foundation business, sometimes just talking about their days. He showed her the legitimate businesses he was building, a private security firm that employed former criminals looking for second chances, a real estate development company focused on affordable housing, a consulting firm that helped businesses protect themselves from fraud. "You're building an empire," Hannah observed one evening. They were at his Westchester estate, sitting on the terrace overlooking the grounds. "I'm building an alternative to the empire I used to run," Santino corrected. "There's a difference. The old empire was built on fear and violence. This one is built on providing actual value to people." "And it's working?" Hannah asked. "It's working," Santino confirmed. "Slowly, but it's working. Another 2 years and I'll be completely out of the criminal side. Everything will be legitimate, legal, clean." He looked at her. "Your grandmother told me that was possible, but I didn't believe her until I met you." "I didn't do anything," Hannah protested. "You showed me what it looks like to build something meaningful," Santino said. "The Ash Rise Initiative helps hundreds of women, employs dozens of people, changes lives every single day. That's the kind of legacy I want to leave. Not the criminal empire my father built, but something that actually matters." He reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her beyond professional handshakes, and Hannah felt electricity run up her arm. "Hannah," Santino said quietly, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly. I have feelings for you, feelings that go beyond gratitude to your grandmother, beyond the professional relationship we've built. I think about you constantly. I find myself making decisions based on what you'd think of them. You've become the person whose opinion matters most to me. Hannah's heart was racing. Santino, let me finish, he said gently. I know this is complicated. I know I'm not the kind of man you probably imagined yourself with. I have a past that can't be erased, connections that can't be completely severed, a history that some people would say makes me unworthy of someone like you. But I also know that I'm changing, genuinely changing, and that change is happening because you've shown me what's possible when you choose to build something good. He squeezed her hand. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I'm just asking you to know how I feel and to consider whether there might be room in your life for someone like me. Hannah looked at this man who'd protected her when she had no one else, who'd honored a debt to her grandmother with a loyalty that went beyond obligation, who was systematically dismantling a criminal empire and rebuilding it into something legitimate because he wanted to be worthy of the second chance Eleanor had given him. I have feelings for you too, Hannah said softly. I've been trying not to acknowledge them because everything in my life has been so chaotic. And I told myself I needed to focus on the foundation, on building my independence, on becoming the person my grandmother believed I could be. But the truth is, when I imagine my future, you're in it. Santino's eyes lit up with something Hannah had never seen there before. Pure, unguarded joy. I'm not ready for anything serious, Hannah continued. I'm still learning who I am outside of marriage, outside of Graham's shadow. But I'd like to see where this goes, slowly, carefully, with both of us being honest about what we want and what we can offer. I can do slowly and carefully, Santino said. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I've waited 15 years to repay my debt to your grandmother. I can wait however long it takes for you to be ready. They sat on the terrace as the sun set over Westchester, holding hands and talking about the future they might build together, a future that neither of them had planned but both of them wanted. A future where a woman who'd been invisible could be seen, and a man who'd lived in shadows could step into the light. 6 months later, on a perfect October afternoon exactly 1 year after Hannah had signed her divorce papers, the Ashreys Initiative held its annual gala. The event took place at a hotel ballroom in Manhattan, attended by philanthropists, attorneys, advocates, and over 100 women who'd been helped by the foundation. Hannah stood at the podium in a dress the color of steel, strong, reflective, unbreakable, and looked out at the crowd. A year ago, I was nobody, Hannah said. I was the invisible wife of a billionaire, a woman who'd made herself so small and quiet that I practically didn't exist. I thought that was my destiny, to be an accessory to someone else's success, to accept whatever scraps I was given, to be grateful for a life that wasn't mine. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the room. But my grandmother, Eleanor Mercer, knew something I'd forgotten. She knew that invisibility isn't weakness. It's often a survival strategy. Women make themselves invisible because it's the only way to survive marriages, relationships, and situations that would destroy them if they were fully seen. And she knew that when those women finally find their way out, when they finally reclaim their visibility, they have the power to change the world. The room was absolutely silent. This year, the Ashreys Initiative helped 847 women escape economically abusive marriages, Hannah continued. We helped them understand their legal rights, access their hidden assets, and negotiate fair settlements. We helped them find safe housing, quality legal representation, and the financial counseling they needed to rebuild their lives. But most importantly, we helped them understand that they were never invisible. They were just waiting for the right moment to step into the light. She could see women in the audience crying, nodding, holding each other's hands. Next year, we're expanding to 10 cities, Hannah said. We're launching a scholarship program for women returning to education after divorce. We're creating a legal fund to help women fight prenuptial agreements signed under duress. And we're building a network of safe houses for women who need to escape immediately, women who can't wait for the legal system to protect them. She glanced at the back of the room, where Santino stood with Victor, both of them watching with pride. None of this would be possible without my grandmother's gift, Hannah said. But it also wouldn't be possible without every woman in this room who's had the courage to step out of the shadows and into her own life. You are the proof that invisibility is not permanent, that erasure is not inevitable, and that the cruelest laughter can become the soundtrack to someone else's triumph. The applause was thunderous. Hannah stepped away from the podium and was immediately surrounded by women wanting to thank her, to share their stories, to tell her what the foundation had meant to them. Later, as the gala wound down, Hannah found herself on the hotel's rooftop terrace, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there was the Halsted Tower, where she'd signed divorce papers and walked away from a life that had never belonged to her. Somewhere out there was her apartment on Central Park West, filled with her grandmother's furniture and her own choices. Somewhere out there was Graham, sitting in a federal prison cell, paying for crimes that had finally caught up with him. "You did good tonight," Santino said, joining her at the railing. "We did good tonight," Hannah corrected. She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. Over the past 6 months, they'd built something real, a relationship based on honesty, respect, and the shared understanding that both of them were becoming better versions of themselves. "I have something to tell you," Santino said. "I finalized the last sale yesterday. As of this morning, I am completely out of the criminal business. Everything I own, everything I run, is legitimate and legal. It took 2 years, but I did it." Hannah turned to look at him, seeing the weight that had lifted from his shoulders. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying," Santino admitted. "I've spent my entire adult life operating in the shadows. Being completely legitimate feels like walking around naked, but it also feels right, like I'm finally becoming the person your grandmother believed I could be." Hannah took his hand. "She would be so proud of you, of both of us." They stood together on the rooftop, looking out at the city that had witnessed Hannah's destruction and rebirth. Below them, the gala continued, hundreds of people celebrating the foundation that had grown from Eleanor Mercer's love and Hannah's courage. "I love you," Santino said quietly. It was the first time he'd said it, and the words hung in the air between them like a promise. Hannah looked at this man who'd protected her when she had nothing, who'd honored his debt to a woman who'd saved his life, who'd dismantled an empire and rebuilt it into something good because he wanted to be worthy of the second chance he'd been given. "I love you too," Hannah said. And standing there on that rooftop, surrounded by the lights of Manhattan and the echoes of laughter from the gala below, Hannah Mercer understood that her grandmother's gift hadn't just been money or property or protection. It had been the belief that Hannah could build a life that mattered, could transform invisibility into power, could take the worst thing that had ever happened to her and turn it into the foundation for something beautiful. She'd been erased, diminished, destroyed. And from those ashes, she'd risen into someone stronger, fiercer, and more alive than she'd ever been. The woman who'd signed divorce papers with shaking hands was gone. In her place stood Hannah Mercer, founder, advocate, survivor, and living proof that the cruelest laughter could indeed become the soundtrack to someone else's victory. She was visible now. She was powerful. She was free. And she was just getting started. 5 years later, the Ashrise Initiative operated in 23 cities across the country, had helped over 14,000 women, and had become the leading organization fighting economic abuse in marriage. Hannah had been featured in Time magazine's 100 Most Influential People, had testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections against financial coercion in marriage, and had written a book about her experience that became a bestseller and inspired thousands more women to leave abusive situations. Santino had built a legitimate business empire worth over $500 million, all of it clean and legal. He'd established his own foundation focused on helping former criminals transition to legitimate work, creating second chances for people who'd made mistakes but wanted to change. They'd gotten married in a small ceremony at the Westchester estate, with only close friends and family present. Hannah wore her grandmother's wedding ring, which Eleanor had left in storage with her furniture. Victor was Santino's best man. Sarah was Hannah's maid of honor. And somewhere, Hannah liked to believe, Eleanor was watching and smiling. Graham Halsted would spend another 18 years in federal prison, his empire dismantled, his reputation destroyed, his name synonymous with greed and cruelty. Marcus and Jonathan had been released after serving their sentences and had disappeared into quiet obscurity. Constance had passed away 2 years earlier, alone in her Palm Beach mansion, her obituary notable mainly for its brevity and the absence of mourners at her funeral. But none of that mattered to Hannah anymore. She'd stopped measuring her success by Graham's failure years ago. Her success was measured in the women she helped, the lives she changed, the legacy she was building. On the 5-year anniversary of the Ashrise Initiative's founding, Hannah stood in the Foundation's flagship office in Manhattan and looked at the wall of photographs, Faces of women who'd come through their doors invisible and left visible, who'd arrived broken and left whole, who'd entered as victims and exited as survivors. Her phone buzzed with a text from Santino. Heading home early, making dinner. Love you. Hannah smiled and typed back, love you too. See you soon. She walked through the office, saying goodbye to her staff, checking on the evening counseling sessions, making sure everything was running smoothly. This was her life now. Meaningful work, genuine relationships, a marriage built on respect and partnership rather than control and diminishment. As she stepped out onto the Manhattan street, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold, Hannah thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago. That woman had believed she was nothing without a man to define her, nothing without wealth to validate her, nothing without the approval of people who'd never really seen her at all. But that woman had been wrong. She'd been everything all along, strong, resilient, capable of building an empire from ashes and transforming pain into purpose. Hannah walked through the city that had witnessed her rebirth, heading home to the man who loved her, to the life she'd built with her own hands, to the future that belonged entirely to her. She was visible. She was powerful. She was free. And the laughter that had once humiliated her had become the echo of her own triumph, fading into memory while her legacy grew stronger with every passing day. Eleanor Mercer had saved her granddaughter's life with a trust fund and a letter. But she'd given her something far more valuable, the knowledge that a woman could lose everything and still build something beautiful from the ruins. Hannah carried that knowledge forward, sharing it with every woman who walked through the Asherise Initiative's doors, proving every single day that invisibility was not permanent, that erasure was not inevitable, and that the woman you became after surviving your own destruction was often the strongest version of yourself. The sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of triumph, and Hannah Mercer walked home to her life, a life built on truth, sustained by love, and defined by the simple radical act of refusing to disappear. She had risen from the ashes, and she would never be invisible again.